Chapter 3741. This. Zhenren Han really didn't expect Xiao Hua to have such a suggestion. Even Master Zun Kong and Zhong Daoran were somewhat stunned. Zhenren Xiao's words. Can you speak for the other fellow Taoists? Zhenren Han thought for a moment and whispered to Zhenren Di Quan and the others. While they were discussing, Xiao Hua also transmitted his voice to Zhong Daoran and the others, telling them about his sudden decision. Zhong Daoran and the others had already obtained spirit pills, and they were all half a step into the out-of-body realm. That life source magic treasure was very important. It was a communication channel between the main body and the nascent soul. They couldn't give up their life source magic treasure, even for a spirit weapon. In particular, there was only one spirit weapon on the jade table. It was not easy to take it out, so they all agreed with Xiao Hua's suggestion. Hearing that Zhong Daoran and the others didn't object, Zhenren Han naturally didn't have any objections. If Xiao Hua made a move, they would have a 60% chance of success. If Xiao Hua didn't make a move, they would only have a 30% chance of success. In fact, at this time, Zhenren Han and the others didn't understand that this was Xiao Hua's earliest suggestion. After the discussion, Daoist Master Di Quan and the others released their yuanying. Daoist Han rubbed his hands. What fell from his hands was not light, but thunder threads. The thunder threads turned into a lightning net and landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead rumbled. Thunderbolts were produced from the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead was like a small horned dragon that pounced on the restriction. Boom, boom, boom. The scene that everyone was familiar with appeared once again. The lightning above the restriction also surged towards the thunder amplification tree. Different types of lightning collided with each other, and one by one, they were annihilated in the void. Seeing the lightning above the restriction weakening, Zhenren Han shouted, "Fellow Taoists, please make a move." As soon as his voice fell, Zhenren Di Quan and the others urged their life source magic treasure to attack the restriction. However, to Xiao Hua's surprise, Fairy Xiongfeng's magic treasure was changed to a bell. There were two bells, and as he waved them, two beams of light, one green and one red, intertwined and rushed into the restriction. Crackle, crackle. The four magical treasures hit the seal, especially Fairy Xiongfeng's green and red brilliance. Although it couldn't be compared to Xiao Hua's spirit-punishing vital light, it was still very sharp. The entire seal shook violently and let out extremely powerful thunderclap. Boom! Amidst the thunderclap, 30% of the lightning threads sent the magic treasures of the four nascent soul cultivators flying, and the remaining 70% of the lightning threads landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The thunder-devouring bead shone brightly, and there was a faint sound of a dragon's roar. Following that, there was a crisp pa-pa-pa sound, and the surface of the originally worn-out thunder-devouring bead actually began to crack. After half of the 7 layers of lightning threads were absorbed by the thunder-devouring bead, the cracks on the thunder-devouring bead grew even larger, and the other half of the lightning threads bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced towards the magic treasures of Daoist Han and the others. Not good. Perfected Han controlled the thunder-devouring bead and immediately sensed that something was wrong. He hurriedly shouted, "My magic treasure can't hold on any longer. Fellow Taoists, be careful." As he spoke, Perfected Han was the first to withdraw and fly back dozens of feet. Daoist Master Di Quan and the others had long since suffered from the restriction, and they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow as they hastily retreated. Xiao is going to make a move. Seeing this, Xiao Hua reminded them, and a golden light flew out from his Daoist robe. Shua! Almost faster than the lightning, the Teng Jiao cut through the loosened restriction below the thunder-devouring bead. At the same time, the restriction was torn open, and there was a loud rumble. The Teng Jiao shears were also hit by layers of lightning and tumbled in the air. Ah! What's going on? Gongshu Isin stared intently at the spirit weapon inside the restriction. But after the golden light flashed, the spirit weapon suddenly disappeared. She exclaimed in disbelief and looked up at Xiao Hua. She really didn't understand how Xiao Hua had taken the spirit weapon away from the restriction that was only a sliver torn. Looking at Xiao Hua again, his figure slightly swayed in the air, and his face suddenly turned pale. "Granny! Kang Lung's restriction is really powerful. Xiao Hua used his mind to take the item, and in just a moment, he was still injured by the lightning. Xiao Hua understood his own difficulties and bitterly smiled in his heart. As soon as the spirit tool fell into Xiao Hua's space, the restriction on the jade table immediately disappeared, and the lightning completely disappeared. When Xiao Hua put away the Teng Jiao shears, only the damaged thunder-devouring bead was left floating in the air. Alas, I lost a treasure, but it's still like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Daoist Master Han sighed and waved his hand, and the thunder-devouring bead was about to fly up. At this moment, Xiao Hua waved his big sleeve and cut off Daoist Master Han's magic power. Smiling, he took out the spirit tool and said with a smile, "Daoist Master Han, I'll make a deal with you."
Oh!
Daoist Master Han saw Xiao Hua stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead and was slightly surprised. Looking at the thunder-devouring bead and then at the spirit tool, he suddenly realized, "Daoist Master Xiao, you've taken a fancy to my thunder-devouring bead?"
That's right,
Xiao Hua said with a smile, "I've taken a fancy to your complete thunder-devouring bead. Unfortunately, the thunder-devouring bead is damaged and can't match up to 40% of the spirit tool's value. I'm in a bit of a difficult position." Daoist Master Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Hua's words were clearly bargaining. If Xiao Hua was in a difficult position, why did he stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead? He was clearly afraid that he wouldn't agree to the deal. It was obvious that he was trying to blackmail him. However, looking at Xiao Hua's smiling face, Daoist Master Han felt a little distressed. Xiao Hua's attitude could be considered amiable. If he was in a different situation, with such a great disparity in strength, what he did would be far more excessive than Xiao Hua. Thinking for a moment, Daoist Master Han waved his hand and removed the magic power controlling the thunder-devouring bead. He said with a smile, "This thunder-devouring bead was obtained by me through life and death. It's very important to me. Although it's already damaged, I'm not willing to give it up." Everyone in the cave mansion was well aware that this sentence was also a bargaining. However, Xiao Hua didn't mind. After all, the thunder-devouring bead was in his hands and the spirit tool was also in his hands. Although he first controlled the thunder-devouring bead to reveal his true thoughts, this was both passive and active. It was better than forcing the thunder-devouring bead into Daoist Master Han's hands. Forget it. Since Daoist Master Han also values the thunder-devouring bead so much, this thunder-devouring bead should be worth 40% of the spirit tool's value. Xiao Hua took a step back and said with a smile, "I'll use 40% of the spirit tool to exchange for this thunder-devouring bead." Straightforward. Daoist Master Han was as surprised as everyone else. They couldn't think of why this damaged thunder-devouring bead was so important to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua would rather give up the spirit tool to obtain this thunder-devouring bead. However, Daoist Master Han was also a decisive person. After thinking for a moment, he nodded in agreement. Xiao Hua laughed mischievously. With a wave of his sleeve, the thunder-devouring bead fell into the space. Once again, the space was filled with lightning and strange phenomena. Xiao Hua once again raised his hand, and the flute-like spirit artifact flew towards Daoist Master Han. He said, "I will give 40% to Daoist Master Han. Daoist Master Han now has 55% of this psychic treasure. Hihi, I'll take 60%. Daoist Master Han was in a good mood. He smiled and prepared to accept the spirit tool. However, right at this moment, the spirit artifact let out a sharp sound that pierced straight into everyone's ears. The spirit artifact suddenly shook and actually escaped from Daoist Han's hands. It drew an arc in the air and rushed into one of the holes. Still want to escape? Xiao Hua's Niwen Palace flashed with golden light and blocked the spirit tool's attack. Then, he sneered and used the heaven and earth sleeve technique to control the spirit tool in an instant. Then, he took out a talisman from his Daoist robe and stuck it on the spirit tool under the urging of his magic power. The spirit tool's undulations immediately disappeared and it obediently lay in Xiao Hua's hand. "Fellow Daoist Han, keep it well." Xiao Hua smiled and threw the spirit tool into Daoist Master Han's hand. Daoist Master Han's face was a bit red. He couldn't keep his face. Xiao Hua didn't care about the spirit tool, but someone did. Old Senior Xiao. Seeing the spirit tool's power, Gongshu Yishin hurriedly said, Old Senior Xiao, this is a Daoist spirit tool. How can you easily give it to others? But after Gongshu Yishin finished speaking, no one echoed her. Gongshu Yishin looked around and saw Gusu Chodi and the others looking at her like she was an idiot. In an instant, the greed that had just arisen subsided and her face flushed red. Wasn't she a Confucian cultivator? What did she want this spirit tool for? Even Master Zun Kong didn't say anything. How could she open her mouth? Besides, she didn't say anything earlier. Now that she saw the spirit tool's power, what was the point of bringing it up again? Daoist Master Han put away the spirit tool and brought Daoist Master Di Quan and the others to a corner to set up a restriction. After a while, the four flew back with smiles on their faces. Obviously, they each gained something. As for whose hands the spirit tool fell into, Xiao Hua didn't care and didn't ask. Zhong Daoran looked at the cave abode that looked like it had been washed by water, and then looked at the 4 different cave entrances. He smiled and said, the matter here is over, and we have no other way out. It seems that we can only break through the last maze. Fellow Taoists, what do you plan to do? Master Zun Kong glanced at Daoist Master Han and the others and asked indifferently, Fellow Daoist Han and the others also want to attack the formation with us? Daoist Master Han said with a smile, I also don't want to follow behind you, but there's no other way. Although Master Zun Kong didn't care about the spirit tool, he didn't want it to fall into the hands of others. This was what ordinary cultivators thought, so he asked Daoist Master Han. Zhong Daoran shook his head and looked at the 4 holes. He said, for more passages, just like before. According to our experience in the previous maze, the most dangerous part of this maze is the protection outside. This maze seems to be where Senior Kang Lungzi tests our strength. Therefore, I think it's better to split up. What do you think, Daoist Master Xiao? Of course. Xiao Hua said with a smile, if we stay together, we'll have fewer opportunities. I agree to split up. In that case, I'll take this passage. Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't object, Zhong Daoran raised his hand and pointed at a jellyfish-like hole. I want to travel with Brother Daoran. What do you think? Just as Zhong Daoran finished speaking, Daoist Master Han hurriedly spoke and cupped his hands towards Zhong Daoran. -13. Chapter 3742. Zhong Daoran looked at Daoist Han, then looked at the strange faces of Daoist Di Quan and the others. He nodded slightly and said, of course. I'll lead the way. Brother Daoran will bring up the rear. Daoist Han saw that Zhong Daoran agreed and flew into the cave without saying a word. Ha ha ha, why is Daoist Han more anxious than this old man? Zhong Daoran laughed and waved his hand. Disciples, hurry up and enter the cave. Yes. Zhong Daoran and the other disciples agreed in unison and flew into the cave with the few low-level disciples. Just as Zhong Daoran was about to fly into the cave, Xiao Hua seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He suddenly flew in front of the jade table and waved his sleeve. The jade table was taken into his space. Then Xiao Hua let out a long breath. He clapped his hands and looked around. He smiled and said, Phew. I finally remembered. I always felt that something was missing. It turns out that I didn't take this jade table away. Faint. Zhong Daoran looked at Xiao Hua's stingy appearance and almost laughed out loud. He said loudly, Brother Xiao, let's meet again in the cave. Okay, I'll wait for Brother Daoran inside. Xiao Hua replied with a smile. As soon as these words came out, Zhong Daoran's figure in midair dropped slightly by half a foot. This was simply more powerful than any spell. Since Daoist Han mentioned that he would follow Zhong Daoran, Daoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi didn't stand on ceremony. They followed Zhai Xingzi and Zun Kong Shangren into the cave. Daoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi wanted to walk together, but seeing Zun Kong Shangren's vigilance, the two consciously separated. Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiong Feng saw that everyone had left and asked with a smile, Can I follow Daoist into the last maze? Of course. Xiao Hua looked at the last remaining somewhat fat cave. The strange beast's shape was like a turtle and also like a big bear. He nodded slightly. Dao Cheng had already said that he knew Daoist Di Quan, but Dao Cheng had already left in advance. At this time, Fairy Xiong Feng was alone. Like Daoist Han, she cupped her hands at Xiao Hua and said, "Since that's the case, I will also lead the way." With that, Fairy Xiong Feng flew into the cave. Xiao Hua turned his head and shouted, "Fuji Wen." However, just as he finished speaking, Xiao Hua was somewhat stunned. He hurriedly turned his head to look at the pitch-black cave entrance. He sniffed and said very strangely, "Strange, why is there a fragrance on Yun Mengzi's body?" Senior. Upon hearing Xiao Hua's call, Fujiwen and Xueping flew over. Fujiwen asked, "Shall we go in as well?" Fujiwen, "Do you think this? Forget it, let's not talk about this for now." Xiao Hua wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked at Xueping and the rest and asked, "There's no one else here. Let me ask you, are you following behind me? Or enter this old man's nation weapon? Junior is willing to enter the nation treasure." A cultivator with serious injuries spoke up. Xueping and the others hesitated for a moment before entering as well. Without another word, Xiao Hua put them into the Kunlun ruins and flew into the cave with Fujiwen. After waiting for Xiao Hua and the others to enter the cave, a few moments later, cloud patterns once again appeared on the stone wall where Xiao Hua and the others had appeared. The Confucian cultivator who was at the 5th level of origin energy from before flew out with a flushed face. As soon as the Confucian cultivator with thick eyebrows appeared, clouds surged around him again. However, when he saw the unusually clean cave abode and the 4 open tunnels, he immediately understood what had happened. This old man has truly underestimated these Dao sect cultivators. I even underestimated Kang Lungzi. My trip to the Cloud Mountain maze today was worth it. After saying that, the Confucian cultivator hurriedly stood there. The flying inscriptions carried an awe-inspiring aura and formed a cauldron-shaped cocoon around him. The inscriptions that had condensed into crystal threads did not dissipate for a long time. However, it was only a moment before the Confucian cultivator opened his eyes reluctantly. He looked at the pitch-black tunnel and sighed, "Sigh, what a pity. I still have to catch up. Otherwise, if Xiao Hua leaves the cave abode, it'll be a little troublesome." After saying that, the Confucian cultivator pondered for a moment and flew into a tunnel. An hour after the Confucian cultivator disappeared, 3 Confucian cultivators wearing bright yellow robes also appeared. The 3 of them were even more decisive than the Confucian cultivator with the thick eyebrows. They didn't stop at all. The 3 of them didn't separate and rushed into a passage. The second layer of the maze was different from the previous ones. The cave was obviously much larger, and there was light coming from an unknown source. In particular, the restriction on divine sense was much stronger. Even someone as strong as Xiao Hua could only extend his divine sense to a range of a few dozen meters, unable to extend it any further. At this time, Xiao Hua had already caught up with Fairy Xiong Feng. Fairy Xiong Feng's so-called scouting ahead was just a polite attitude. If Xiao Hua did not bring Fujiwen, he could let Fairy Xiong Feng fly in front. However, with Fujiwen, Xiao Hua could only let Fujiwen take the heart-stabilizing plate and lead the way. Of course, Fairy Xiong Feng did not dare to not do anything. In this second layer of the maze, she had already blocked many attacks for Fujiwen and had even used her life source magic weapon several times. "All right, Daoist Yun Meng." Seeing Fairy Xiong Feng working so hard, Xiao Hua felt a bit embarrassed and said with a smile, "You rest for a moment. Next, Fujiwen and I will lead the way. Then I will have to trouble Daoist Xiao." Fairy Xiong Feng was truly exhausted. Her cheekbones flashed with a strange light. Xiao Hua waved his hand and took out a pill from the space. He handed it to Fairy Xiong Feng and said with a smile, "This is a pill refined by Xiao Hua. It can replenish quintessential essence. Why don't you try it?" Fairy Xiong Feng smiled and took the pill. However, she did not consume it and replied, "I am just a bit exhausted. I will be fine after resting for a while." Xiao Hua's expression did not change. He slapped his hand and the seal of overturning sea flew above Fujiwen's head to protect him. "Daoist Xiao." Fairy Xiong Feng looked around and asked curiously, "Where are Xueping and the others? Did they stay in the cave?" No. Xiao Hua replied without turning his head. Xiao Hua has a country weapon. I will temporarily keep them inside and let them out after we get the cave. Oh. Fairy Xiong Feng was slightly surprised. She rolled her eyes and said, Daoist Xiao is very protective of your disciples. Xue Ping and the others are not Xiao Hua's disciples. Xiao Hua corrected, Xiao Hua only met him once. Since you only met him once? Fairy Xiong Feng asked in confusion. Daoist Xiao believes Xue Ping's words. You dare to bring him into the Misty Mountain Maze? Yes. Xiao Hua nodded. Aren't we in the Misty Mountain Maze now? His words are not wrong. That is not what I meant. Fairy Xiong Feng hurriedly explained. What I mean is that Daoist Xiao is already able to bring them in. Moreover, in the cave from before, I saw that these low-level disciples had already found some useful treasures. In particular, when they passed through the stone wall, they obtained a lot. Daoist Xiao does not need to bring these burdens. Daoist Xiao means to leave them in the cave from before? That is not it. Sigh, I don't know what to say. Fairy Xiong Feng was at a loss for words. She was purely trying to dispel Xiao Hua's conflict and increase his favorable impression of her. I just feel that Daoist Xiao is doing too much for these strangers. Perhaps. Xiao Hua activated the seal of overturning ocean, and a ferocious earthen yellow radiance rushed past Fu Juwen, sweeping away all the huge rocks that were smashing towards him. He replied somewhat absent-mindedly, they are still my Dao sect's disciples after all. I also want to give them some benefits. Daoist Xiao is so kind. Fairy Xiong Feng sneered in her heart. However, her tone did not change. She then asked, oh, right. I was invited by Daoist Di Quan. However, I heard from Dao Cheng that Daoist Xiao had just returned from the Yaotai gathering. Could it be that Daoist Xiao did not kill my Dao sect disciples on the Yaotai mountain? Of course I have killed Dao sect disciples. However, I have killed more Confucian sect disciples. Xiao Hua did not seem to notice. He still had his back facing Fairy Xiong Feng as he said, moreover, I have killed many Dao sect disciples. However, I have saved many more. I don't believe it. Fairy Xiong Feng laughed. That year, I participated in the Yaotai gathering and killed many people. There were many Dao sect disciples inside. It is up to you whether you believe it or not. Xiao Hua turned around. His eyes were very clear. I have no regrets. No regrets. Fairy Xiong Feng cursed inwardly. After passing through the maze, she did not see Fairy Shuming and did not hear Zhai Xingzi and the others mention her. How could Fairy Xiong Feng not know that Fairy Shuming had died in Xiao Hua's hands? I heard that this Yaotai gathering was different from before. Not only did golden core cultivators die inside, even nascent soul cultivators were almost wiped out. Fairy Xiong Feng asked again. Xiao Hua nodded, indeed. Why? How would I know? Xiao Hua shook his head. I was also seriously injured inside. I was lucky to escape and do not know the details. Of course, if Daoist Yunmeng wants to know who I have killed, I can tell you the reason. Don't. Fairy Xiong Feng hurriedly waved her hand. Daoist Xiao, you are preparing to kill me. I don't want to hear this. It doesn't matter. Xiao Hua laughed. If I don't mention names, how would you know? I have endured for a long time. If I don't tell anyone, I will feel uncomfortable. Very well. Fairy Xiong Feng laughed bitterly. I can only believe in Daoist Xiao's character. Then, Xiao Hua explained in detail why he killed Daoist Xiong Tian and Daoist Chu Feng. Fairy Xiong Feng's expression changed several times. In the end, she sighed slightly and said, Daoist Xiao, you killed them well. One of them bullied the weak and forced people to buy and sell. In the end, he even harmed the innocent. The other one was even more sinister. He wanted to take advantage of your injuries to steal your Qiankuan bag. He indeed deserved to be killed. -13. Chapter 3743. If fellow Daoist Elmar thinks so, then that's great. Xiao Hua said with a smile, I've always convinced people with virtue. Now that you and I are going to break through the maze of Misty Mountain, we should trust each other. Daoist Xiao, don't worry. Fairy Xiongfeng nodded. I have absolute trust in Daoist Xiao. Oh, right. Xiao Hua suddenly asked, does fellow Daoist Elmar know Fairy Shuming? Of course. Fairy Xiongfeng blinked her eyes and said curiously, Ji Prefecture's Fairy Shuming is a late nascent soul stage cultivator. How could I not know? At this point, Fairy Xiongfeng rolled her eyes and said with a smile, could it be that Daoist Xiao has something to say directly to Fairy Shuming? Or, does Daoist Xiao have other ideas? Oh, according to what I know, although Fairy Shuming has never dual cultivated, she still has dual cultivated, Daoist Xiao. Without waiting for Fairy Xiongfeng to finish speaking, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand to stop her. He rolled his eyes at her and said, no matter how useless I am, I won't find such an arrogant female cultivator as my dual cultivation partner. I'm just joking with Daoist Xiao. Why is Daoist Xiao looking for Fairy Shuming? Fairy Xiongfeng asked. Nothing much. Xiao Hua's face sank. In the future, whether it's Ji Prefecture or Hidden Immortal Continent, there won't be a cultivator called Fairy Shuming. Oh, why? Fairy Xiongfeng was surprised, but suddenly she seemed to have thought of something. She hurriedly stopped in midair and asked in a low voice, what does Daoist Xiao mean? I've only met Fairy Shuming once. I don't care about the grudges between you and Fairy Shuming. Why is Daoist Xiao talking to me about this? Hee, Daoist Elmar doesn't need to worry. Xiao Hua said with a smile, I just want to tell Daoist Xiao that the cultivator who forced her to buy and sell was Daoist Chufeng. Fairy Shuming wanted to take revenge for Daoist Chufeng and wanted to besiege me with other cultivators in the first maze, but I killed her. Sigh. Fairy Xiongfeng took a deep breath and sighed. Damn Fairy Shuming. That Daoist Master Chu used her name to commit a lot of evil deeds, but these evil deeds were nothing more than gossip in Fairy Shuming's ears. Now that she was dead, it was her retribution. In fact, there is really no need for Daoist Master Xiao to mention this to me. Xiao Hua stared at Fairy Xiongfeng and asked word by word, oh, this Xiao wants to know if fellow Daoist saw Fairy Shuming when you entered the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Fairy Xiongfeng didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she calmly replied, this old man can swear a blood oath that this old man didn't see Fairy Shuming and the others outside the Misty Mountain Maze. Hearing Fairy Xiongfeng's words, Xiao Hua's expression relaxed. He smiled and said, fellow Daoist Elmar, there's no need to be so serious. I was just asking. It was also at this time that a rumbling sound came from afar. It was as if the entire secret passage had collapsed. An earth-shattering cloud of dust mixed with gravel rushed toward Xiao Hua and the others. Seeing this, Fairy Xiongfeng hurriedly waved her hand. A jade bracelet like magic treasure flew out. At the same time, she shouted, Daoist Master Xiao, be careful. This old man just happens to have a bracelet that repels dust. Okay. Xiao Hua didn't have time to care about whether Fairy Xiongfeng had sworn a blood oath or not. He agreed and stepped aside, watching the jade bracelet fly in front of his head. The jade bracelet emitted an earthy yellow brilliance. That brilliance was like a long cover. Not only did it cover Fu Jiwen and himself, it also produced a strange fluctuation in front of his head. It separated the dust and gravel that were rushing over to both sides. However, the strength of the gravel in the secret passage was extremely great. The brilliance of the jade bracelet trembled rapidly like a candle in the wind. Daoist Master Xiao. Fairy Xiongfeng softly reprimanded and called out, this is the restriction of the secret passage. It seems to be quite powerful. We must work harder to break through. The longer we stay in this restriction, the more dangerous it will be. This old man will lead the way. Okay. I'll have to trouble you, fellow Daoist. Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xiongfeng's vigorous figure flying in front of him. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Sure enough, the restrictive spells in the second layer of the formation were far stronger than those in the first layer. Fairy Xiongfeng would not care about the dust and pebbles that were pouring into the tunnel like a flood if she were anywhere else. However, as she kept moving forward, she found it harder and harder to keep going. This was because not only did she have to find the direction in this secret passage, she also had to maintain the magic power of her magic treasure. Especially as she went deeper into the secret passage, Fairy Xiongfeng found that her magic power was getting more and more exhausted. Moreover, the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi in the secret passage was getting thinner and thinner. The magic power consumed by Yuanying was much more than usual. Daoist Master Xiao. After flying like this for an hour, there was still no end in sight. Fairy Xiongfeng could only open her mouth and say, "This secret passage is strange. This old man's magic power is actually not enough. This old man reckons that I can still hold on for the time of a meal. After that, I will let Daoist Master Xiao lead the way." This Xiao has already sensed it. Xiao Hua's face also became serious. He said, "This maze is actually starting to restrict my Daoist magic power. At the same time, it is also gradually isolating the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi. I fear that there will be big trouble ahead." Chenpage. Fairy Xiongfeng snorted coldly. She took out a pill from her bosom and put it into her mouth. She said very heroically, "This old man wants to see how powerful this maze is." As she spoke, Fairy Xiongfeng once again activated her magic power. The jade bracelet shone brightly. Like a bamboo umbrella swaying in a storm, it rushed into the distance. "Fujiwen." Xiao Hua looked into the distance and ordered, "You can hide in here." "Yes, Master." Fujiwen hurriedly kept the heart-calming plate. Xiao Hua took out the Kunlun mirror and kept Fujiwen. Then, Xiao Hua pointed at the seal of the ocean and shouted, "Daoist Yunmeng, this Xiao will help you." Wang Wang. The coiling dragon roared. The seal rumbled. An earthen yellow light that was much more vast than the jade bracelet shot out from the seal of the ocean and chased after it like a flood dragon. "Thank you, Daoist Xiao." Fairy Xiongfeng looked at the power of Xiao Hua's seal of the ocean and her heart sank. However, there was no change in her expression. She only smiled and nodded. She retreated slightly and made space for Xiao Hua. Just like that, they flew for another 2 hours. Seeing that the secret tunnel was even wider and the qi of heaven and earth was almost gone, Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng's true essence was suppressed by the restriction in the secret tunnel and could not flow. Their nascent souls were also tightly locked in their lower dantian and could not be released even if they wanted to. Fairy Xiongfeng was still fine as she was only a nascent soul. However, Xiao Hua had more than 100 nascent souls in his lower dantian. That terrifying pressure almost made him collapse. Helpless, Xiao Hua could only take out the Kunlun mirror and keep all the nascent souls in the Kunlun ruins. Phew! With the nascent souls gone, the pressure suddenly decreased. Xiao Hua let out a long sigh of relief. At this moment, Fairy Xiongfeng suddenly shouted in surprise, "Daoist Xiao, quickly release your divine sense. Divine sense is restricted here." "Oh!" Xiao Hua hurriedly released his divine sense. As expected, the restriction on his divine sense was long gone. His divine sense was very free in the secret tunnel. What is going on? Xiao Hua frowned slightly. However, he felt a lot more at ease. Since his divine sense could be controlled and his divine sense could be used, he had one more method to protect himself. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a sound like the sound of water. Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng both felt their Dharma treasures break through a layer of barrier. Their bodies also became lighter. The surrounding dust and rocks and the heavy pressure disappeared. When they looked around again, it was just a misty space. Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng looked at each other, their eyes were filled with shock. The two of them did not dare to put away their Dharma treasures and released their divine sense to check. It was not a big deal, but the two of them had a strange expression on their faces. Because their divine sense could not scan the edge of the space at all. "Daoist Xiao, can you still use your Dharma power?" Fairy Xiongfeng saw Xiao Hua's expression and knew that things were not good. "No." Xiao Hua shook his head. However, he looked down and said, "Although we cannot use flying techniques or Dharma power, we are still standing in the air." Then he looked up at the seal of overturning ocean that rushed out earlier. There was no light, no Dharma power fluctuation. It was just floating in the air as if it was placed on a table. Xiao Hua walked a few steps and even jumped a few times. He reached out his hand and took the seal of overturning ocean. He weighed it in his hand and said, "Our Dharma treasures cannot be used either." Ouch! Saying this, Xiao Hua's expression changed greatly. What is it? Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiong Feng also picked up the jade bracelet from the air and asked hurriedly. Qiankuan bag cannot be used. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This. Fairy Xiong Feng tried a little. As expected, the jade bracelet could not be put into the Qiankuan bag. Her expression changed greatly. Woo! At this moment, a gust of wind came from an unknown place. It was very cold and desolate. Fairy Xiong Feng could not help but shrink her neck. However, just as she moved, she froze in place. She hurriedly looked at Xiao Hua. Fortunately, Xiao Hua did not notice Fairy Xiong Feng's movement. Instead, he looked into the distance. After a moment, Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, Daoist Yunmeng, follow me. Saying this, he did not wait for Fairy Xiong Feng to speak and walked towards the right. Daoist. Fairy Xiong Feng opened her mouth. She did not know where Xiao Hua's confidence came from. After all, in this place, there was only light. Spiritual sense could not see the edge of this place. Even a Yuanying cultivator was no different from an ordinary blind person. However, Fairy Xiong Feng tactfully followed behind Xiao Hua. However, when she saw Xiao Hua's defenseless junior, her eyes flashed with a strange expression. Xiao Hua did not walk in a straight line. Most of the time, he would even walk backwards. In particular, every time he changed directions, Xiao Hua did not stop at all. It was as if he could see the path under his feet clearly. Xiao. Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiong Feng could not help but say, You can see the space restriction? -13. Chapter 3744. No. Xiao Hua replied without the slightest hesitation. When Fairy Xiong Feng heard this, she almost jumped up. She even said in a low voice, Since you can't see, why are you bringing me around here? Xiao Hua shrugged and replied humorously, Since Daoist friend doesn't know where to go, why don't you follow me? Just treat it as digestion. Digestion? Fairy Xiong Feng almost fell down again. This was the Misty Mountain Maze, a maze set up by a tribulation-passing cultivator. Their lives could be in danger at any time. How could he be so casual? At this moment, Fairy Xiong Feng really wanted to slap Xiao Hua's face. After walking for a while, Fairy Xiong Feng's heart began to move. Unlike the arrogant Fairy Shuming, she didn't have the intention to let Xiao Hua go. Although Xiao Hua said so much, she didn't believe him completely. Xiao Hua's character didn't have much light in her eyes. What she wanted to do was to kill Xiao Hua and calmly escape. Now that they were in this mysterious space, even if she did not have any means to attack Xiao Hua, as long as she could escape from this space and kill Xiao Hua, wouldn't she achieve her goal? While thinking, Fairy Xiong Feng looked at Xiao Hua's back and looked left and right. Then, she turned around and started to walk away. Wang. Just as Fairy Xiong Feng walked a few feet forward, the seemingly ordinary light in front of her immediately disappeared. Following a series of rumbling noises, leaves and pine needles flew toward her like a storm. Oh! Fairy Xiong Feng scanned with her divine sense and immediately found the difference between the leaves and pine needles. She knew that the leaves contained a strong force. She snorted and did not hesitate to raise her hand to cast a spell. Just as she raised her hand, Fairy Xiong Feng's expression changed drastically. How could she still use her dharmic powers at this moment? These seemingly ordinary flying leaves and pine needles were now sharp weapons for murder. He could instantly kill her right here and now. Oh no! Fairy Xiong Feng quickly retreated, but she had miscalculated. Not only could she not cast any spells, but her movements were also somewhat slow. How could she block the continuous flying leaves? Fairy Xiong Feng knew that things were not good. She could only hope that her armor could block so many attacks. Sigh. The flying leaves and pine needles seemed to have the power to tear the void apart. Fairy Xiong Feng's face turned even paler when she heard this. In the blink of an eye, Fairy Xiong Feng's spiritual sense transformed into a hand. She did not care whether it was effective or not, and grabbed at the air like a Yuanying hand. Woo! Out of Fairy Xiong Feng's expectation, A nascent soul hand similar to the one she usually used appeared and grabbed all the flying leaves and pine needles in the hand, sweeping away all the miscellaneous items in the space. I see. Fairy Xiong Feng immediately came to a realization. She understood why she could only use her spiritual will in this space. This space is where Senior Kang Langzi tested the juniors of the Dao Sec. What's important is the finer control of one's divine sense. Just as Fairy Xiong Feng came to a realization, Kachacha. 1,000 feet above her head, streaks of lightning appeared. Then, layers of dark clouds rolled and formed all sorts of indescribable shapes. Numerous fist-sized hailstones formed in the dark clouds and came crashing down. Good timing. Fairy Xiong Feng was filled with a heroic spirit. She performed a spell with both hands. Even though she did not use any arcane energy, it was no different from using arcane energy. One after another, cherry blossom-like lights appeared above Fairy Xiong Feng's head, protecting her firmly. PFFF PFFF PFFF. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiong Feng had underestimated the power of the hailstones. The hailstones immediately destroyed the cherry blossoms that had just bloomed. Moreover, the second and third layer of hailstones did not stop falling. It seemed like they had no intention of stopping. Not good. Seeing the power of the hailstones, Fairy Xiong Feng's pride was crushed in her heart. She hurriedly released her spiritual will to form more cherry blossoms. Of course, the cherry blossoms were destroyed by the hailstones again. Fairy Xiong Feng was indeed a late-stage Yuanian cultivator. She was extremely proficient in controlling her spiritual will and coordinating her spells. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, she had already formed close to 100 layers of cherry blossoms. These 100 layers of cherry blossoms blocked the 100 layers of hailstones, protecting her from being injured by the hailstones. Woo! When there was a gap, Fairy Xiong Feng immediately activated her Yuanian hand. The Yuanian hand grew to the size of a few mu and grabbed towards the sky. In an instant, the entire layer of clouds was torn apart. Fairy Xiong Feng took this opportunity to retreat. However, the moment the layer of clouds was torn apart, the hailstones fell onto the Yuanian hand. The huge force caused the Yuanian hand to collapse. Fairy Xiong Feng had no choice but to continue using her spells to form more cherry blossoms to block the hailstones. Then, she slowly retreated. This repeated for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Fairy Xiong Feng was starting to feel tired. Not only were there too many hailstones, but the force of the hailstones was also too strong. Fairy Xiong Feng's spirit sense was greatly depleted, and she could vaguely feel a tearing sensation coming from her Niwen palace. Fairy Xiong Feng raised her head and looked at the cherry blossoms that were swept away by the hailstones. The cherry blossoms should have been tens of feet away from Fairy Xiong Feng, but now, they were only tens of feet away from Fairy Xiong Feng's head. Fairy Xiong Feng's heart was filled with bitterness. She did not expect that the spiritual will that she had cultivated for 1,000 years could only last for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Looking at the endless hailstones and the distance she had retreated had already exceeded the distance she had advanced. She still could not see Xiao Hua. Fairy Xiong Feng laughed bitterly. Just a moment ago, she was still scheming against Xiao Hua. However, she did not expect that she was the stupidest one. Oh! Daoist Yunmeng, so you are here. At this time, Xiao Hua's shocked voice sounded in front of Fairy Xiong Feng. Just now, this Xiao turned around and could not find you. I did not expect you to fall into a restriction. Daoist Xiao, quickly use your Yuanian hand. Fairy Xiong Feng heard Xiao Hua's voice and called out without hesitation. However, just as she said that, she was filled with regret. Yes, this was a dead end. Although she could not escape, why couldn't she drag Xiao Hua down with her? Could it be that she was inferior to Fairy Shuming? Yuanian hand? How can I use it without magic power? Xiao Hua was also shocked. However, looking at the cherry blossoms above Fairy Xiong Feng's head, Xiao Hua fell into deep thought. He then looked at the hailstones rushing towards him and quickly slapped his forehead. Boom! His spiritual will rushed out and a Yuanian hand of several mu in size appeared, tearing apart the hailstones and black clouds above him and Fairy Xiong Feng. Ha ha ha, so that's how it is. Xiao Hua was naturally not as foolish as Fairy Xiongfeng. When he saw this, he naturally understood that Fairy Xiongfeng felt extremely bitter in her heart. Daoist Yunmeng, follow this Xiao. Xiao Hua's yuaning hand was much more solid than Fairy Xiongfeng's. That layer of hailstones was unable to destroy it. Xiao Hua had enough time to find the exit. Ari, many thanks, Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiongfeng was somewhat helpless. She clearly did not want to obtain any benefits, but in a life-and-death situation, she had no choice but to follow Xiao Hua. Looking at how Xiao Huadong quickly walked out of the dark clouds, Fairy Xiongfeng squinted her eyes and looked at the previously calm light screen. She bowed and said, I thank Daoist Xiao for your help. It's fine, it's fine. Xiao Hua casually waved his hand and said, follow this Xiao. Don't be careless. This place is really dangerous. Yes. Fairy Xiongfeng slightly gritted her teeth. It was unknown whether the hatred in her heart had increased or decreased. Xiao Hua was still leisurely strolling around. However, there was no danger in this stroll. Not to mention hailstones, there were not even pine needles or flying leaves. However, the space was still boundless. It seemed that even if he walked for 10,000 years, it would still be the same. Oh! Why is there wind? Fairy Xiongfeng's heart was not as clear as Xiao Hua's. Only now did she notice that the sound of wind when they first entered the space had increased. It made her feel a real chill. Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiongfeng could not help but say, this wind is somewhat strange. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said helplessly, please fellow Daoist, there is no need for you to say anything. This Xiao has been blown around for a long time. How could I not know? Then, is there any other way out? Fairy Xiongfeng gritted her teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. However, she still held back her anger and asked. Xiao Hua shrugged and shook his head, this Xiao does not know. However, this Xiao feels that, as long as there is wind blowing past, there must be an exit. Perhaps the exit of this space is right in front. Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? Fairy Xiongfeng said angrily, you are talking about an ordinary cave. This is a maze set up by Senior Kang Langzi. How could there be, Wu? Before Fairy Xiongfeng could finish, a strange gust of wind blew her words back into her throat. Fairy Xiongfeng was caught off guard. Her body tilted slightly. She did not dare to be careless and quickly released her spiritual sense. A several kai large cover covered her. Whoosh, whoosh. A few terrifying sounds could be heard coming from the cover. Fairy Xiongfeng could see that the cover formed by her divine sense was being torn apart by the strange wind. Sigh. Fairy Xiongfeng sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock, if this wind landed on my body, if I did not have a magic treasure to protect me, wouldn't my body be cut into pieces? Thinking of this, Fairy Xiongfeng hurriedly looked at Xiao Hua. Sigh. Fairy Xiongfeng screamed again as if she had a toothache. Xiao Hua, who was not far from Fairy Xiongfeng, was shaking, but he didn't use his divine sense to protect himself. Instead, he simply stretched out his hands and stood there as if he was hugging the wind. The strange wind that could cut through the divine sense barrier blew on Xiao Hua's body. His Daoist robe was torn apart like a butterfly, but Xiao Hua didn't seem to have heard it. It was as if his body wasn't afraid of it at all. -13. Chapter 3745. Shameless. Fairy Xiongfeng couldn't help but spit out in shock. This was because the Daoist robe on Xiao Hua's body had already begun to shatter, and his arm was already exposed. Inside, there was dark golden skin. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiongfeng was now Yunmengzi. Even if she didn't want to look, she couldn't avoid it. She could only use her divine sense to form a barrier and follow behind Xiao Hua with difficulty. Fairy Xiongfeng felt like an ordinary person trudging through a violent gale. As she ventured deeper into the storm, an indescribable feeling of suffocation arose from her Niwen palace. It was as if the wind had turned into mud, covering her mouth and nose. Her chest heaved rapidly. She wanted to gasp for air, but she couldn't breathe in a single breath of fresh air. Wong wong wong. Just as Fairy Xiongfeng was about to call out to Xiao Hua, the entire space started to shake. The strange wind that was squeezing her to the point of bursting suddenly disappeared. Not good. Xiao Hua yelled from afar. Daoist Yun Mengzi, quickly come over. Fairy Xiong Feng also felt a sense of danger. She hurriedly rushed over to where Xiao Hua was. However, before she could reach Xiao Hua's back, she saw a funnel-like object gradually forming in midair in the originally misty space in the distance. The strange wind that had stopped earlier started to grow stronger again. However, this time, the strange wind had a rotational force. Wind. Hurricane. Fairy Xiong Feng blurted out, it's like the tsunamis and hurricanes of the East Sea. She looked at the wobbling funnel in the distance that looked like a baby that couldn't walk yet. That's right. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. He looked at the hurricane that was slowly moving over and said calmly, this hurricane is the true test of space. The hurricane is moving towards where we need to go. We can't avoid it. Only by using a divine sensibility to escape from the hurricane can we pass Senior Kang Lung's test. This is almost impossible. Fairy Xiong Feng smiled bitterly. This old man's spirit energy is already at the upper stage of the 4th grade. Although my spirit energy hasn't undergone any special refinement, before the test, my spirit energy is already somewhat exhausted. My Niwen Palace is abnormally painful. Even a spirit-severing stage cultivator would find it difficult to pass such a trial, let alone a leaving aperture stage cultivator. To nascent soul cultivators like us, this cloudy mountain bewildering formation is a dead end. Perhaps we should have tried to find a way out of the cave just now. Fellow Daoist, do you regret it? Xiao Hua asked indifferently as he faced the gale that had already begun to blow. Of course not. Fairy Xiong Feng narrowed her eyes. She knew that her answer was completely irrelevant to Xiao Hua's question. That's great. How could Xiao Hua know what Fairy Xiong Feng was thinking? He nodded and said, since you don't regret, then protect yourself first. Let me see if I can bring you out of this hurricane. You. And, bring me along. Fairy Xiong Feng was in disbelief. It's a pity that this Xiao's nation armament can't be used. Xiao Hua said somewhat regretfully, otherwise, this Xiao would have collected you first, and things would have been much easier. Perhaps. Fairy Xiong Feng declined to comment. How could she be willing to fall into Xiao Hua's hands? While they were speaking, the gale had already closed in. The surrounding space had already formed a huge whirlpool under the enormous hurricane force. Xiao Hua looked at this huge funnel hurricane. It was very similar to the huge whirlpool under Yarotai Mountain. However, this funnel's might was far inferior to that whirlpool. Okay, now is the time. Seeing that Xiao Hua was about to be blown away by the hurricane, Xiao Hua roared and shouted, fellow Daoist El Dreamy, quickly stretch out your arm. Oh, okay. Fairy Xiong Feng's barrier was already on the verge of shattering. Hearing Xiao Hua's roar, she was slightly startled and immediately stretched out her arm. Let's go. Xiao Hua grabbed Fairy Xiong Feng's arm. His body flew up gracefully and started to spin in the direction of the hurricane. How is this possible? Fairy Xiong Feng saw that Xiao Hua was flying extremely steadily as though he was using a flying technique. She naturally did not dare to believe it. However, when she scanned with her spiritual will, she immediately understood. Xiao Hua actually used his spiritual will to form 2 wings on his back. Now, with a flap of the wings, he actually flew up. While Fairy Xiong Feng was dumbfounded, Xiao Hua's little tail had already started to curl up. When he felt the strange wind, he was already thinking about how to escape. When he was fighting with Kong Hongwu at the foot of Yarotai Mountain, Kong Hongwu's sacred art of transforming his air and qi into wings immediately appeared in his mind. Kong Hongwu had already refined his spirit to the void and could form wings. Although Xiao Hua's cultivation did not have such a divine ability, his spiritual will was far superior to Kong Hongwu's. Now, he actually succeeded. Of course, to form wings with his spiritual will to fly, he still had to resist the hurricane. Xiao Hua's spiritual will was greatly exhausted. However, Xiao Hua had plenty of experience fighting against the hurricane. Thus, he was not in any danger. God. After a long time, this thought appeared in Fairy Xiong Feng's mind. To be able to form wings with his spiritual will, especially without the use of any spells, meant that his control over his spiritual will was extremely precise. It was something that she could not even imagine. Moreover, she knew very well that if one did not have an ancient secret technique, it would be impossible to cultivate this divine ability successfully. At least from what Fairy Xiongfeng had seen, there was no second person like this in the entire hidden immortal continent. Xiongtian, Xiongtian, of all people, why did you have to offend him? Fairy Xiongfeng felt a sense of helplessness. If what Xiao Hua said is true, why did you? Thinking of this, Fairy Xiongfeng did not know what to think or how to complain. Rumble. Fairy Xiongfeng's entire body shook. Even Xiao Hua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiao Hua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the two of them were like two balls of paper dancing in the wind. Rumble. Fairy Xiongfeng's entire body shook. Even Xiao Hua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiao Hua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the two of them were like two balls of paper dancing in the wind. Xiao Hua very naturally loosened his grip and was about to cast a spell. At this moment, Fairy Xiongfeng's figure floated to Xiao Hua's back along with the wind. Xiao Hua's dark golden neck was only a few feet away from Fairy Xiongfeng's head. Fairy Xiongfeng's eyes opened wide. Her eyes flashed and her hand on her chest involuntarily moved to her waist. However, when she felt the sharp protrusion on her waist, a rare trace of hesitation appeared in Fairy Xiongfeng's heart. However, this hesitation disappeared in a flash. Fairy Xiongfeng moved her finger and was about to take out the sharp protrusion. At this moment, Xiao Hua suddenly shouted, "Damn it, this old man forgot that spiritual power cannot be used." Watch this old man tilde as he spoke, Xiao Hua's spirit sense changed in the air again. A flying boat that looked like a flying leaf appeared below Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng. Xiao Hua stepped on it and waved his hand. "Daoist el dreamy, come on up quickly, this Xiao understands." Fairy Xiongfeng saw that the opportunity to assassinate Xiao Hua had disappeared and felt rather regretful. She had no choice but to step on the flying boat. She smiled and said, "What did Daoist Xiao understand? This is Senior Kang Lang Zi testing our spiritual will. Not only is it testing the thickness of our spiritual will, it is also testing the control of our spiritual will. In this space, all spiritual power is empty. There is only spiritual will. Spiritual will is spiritual power." Xiao Hua was somewhat excited. He looked at the flying boat and shouted, "Spiritual will can even replace magic treasures." Fairy Xiongfeng looked at the excited Xiao Hua with disdain. She already knew this when she first fell into the trap. However, she still agreed. Daoist Xiao is truly powerful. Even now, this old man still does not understand how a Yuaning's hand is used. Furthermore, look at Daoist Xiao's wings and this flying boat. It is truly amazing. This is nothing. Xiao Hua smiled and shook his head. Just as he was about to speak, rumble. There was another huge tremor. The flying boat instantly disintegrated into nothingness. Xiao Hua seemed to be prepared for this. He reached out and grabbed Fairy Xiongfeng again. His divine intent condensed again. This time, Fairy Xiongfeng was even more dumbfounded. Under his divine intent, a pair of 100-meter-long wings appeared on Xiao Hua's back. When the wings spread, it gave off the feeling of a great rock soaring 90,000 miles with the wind. I must have seen wrongly. Fairy Xiongfeng did not dare to believe her spiritual will. This pair of wings was extremely realistic. Not only were the huge wings flapping in the whirlwind, but the feathers on the wings were also trembling. It was as though real feathers were fluttering in the air. With the wings formed by his spiritual will, Xiao Hua was like a bird in the sky, free and unrestrained in the whirlwind. During this period, the wings formed by his spiritual will were shattered hundreds of times. However, every time they were shattered, the wings would immediately reappear. Xiao Hua's body did not even sway. Fairy Xiongfeng's spiritual will was constantly staring at Xiao Hua's back. Seeing how miraculous Xiao Hua's spiritual will was, her heart turned cold. She had activated her divine sense to protect her own body. No one knew better than her about the hurricane and the force behind it that Xiao Hua was currently facing. No one understood better than her how difficult it was to condense a pair of wings with one's divine sense in this hurricane. Not only that, at the very beginning, when she was struggling with Xiao Hua in the whirlwind, Xiao Hua's body was constantly swaying. His entire body was also trembling. However, after half a meal, she discovered that Xiao Hua's body was gradually stabilizing. His entire body seemed to be one with the wings on his back. He was like a real bird circling in the whirlwind. The whirlwind was naturally not an ordinary one. Not only did it have a terrifying wind force, there were also small whirlpools within the whirlwind. These whirlpools also had a tearing force. The barrier formed by Fairy Xiongfeng's spiritual will was shattered by these whirlpools. However, since Fairy Xiongfeng could protect herself, there was no need to mention Xiao Hua. -13. Chapter 3746. Xiao Hua didn't know how big this hurricane was. After flying for several hours, he finally saw the edge of the hurricane. Only then did the oppressive force begin to slowly lessen. Haha, if that's the case, then we don't need to fly anymore. Xiao Hua did his best to rush out of the hurricane and shouted with a loud laugh. But just as he shouted, Xiao Hua's body suddenly fell, and his face became deathly pale. After Xiao Hua stabilized his body, a pair of wings that were only a few feet long grew out and slowly brought Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng down. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled and said, "Daoist el dreamy, this Xiao's spirit sense has been greatly exhausted. It seems that we can only walk step by step." "No worries." Fairy Xiongfeng's eyes flashed and smiled. "I'm already very satisfied to be able to escape with Daoist Yun Meng's blessing. What's wrong with walking a few more steps?" "Okay, we'll walk slowly," Xiao Hua said as he released his hand. Fairy Xiongfeng also transformed into a simple flying boat and descended from the sky. After Fairy Xiongfeng landed, she immediately placed her hand on her waist and bit her lip. At this moment, other than spiritual will, there were no other sacred arts that could be used. Xiao Hua's struggle in the hurricane had already exhausted his spiritual will. Fairy Xiongfeng didn't think that Xiao Hua would have a stronger spiritual will than her when her own Niwen palace was in extreme pain. Sigh, not good. Before Fairy Xiongfeng could take out the item, Xiao Hua looked into the distance with a puzzled expression. "What's wrong? Daoist Xiao?" Fairy Xiongfeng moved her hand away from her waist and looked into the distance and released her spirit sense again. However, the area dozens of miles in front of him was still empty, and there was nothing suspicious about it. Listen, Xiao Hua was very mysterious. He put his index finger on his mouth and whispered. Fairy Xiongfeng frowned and listened attentively. Sure enough, in just a few moments, her expression changed drastically. That was because there was a slight vibration coming from the wind. It was slow and rhythmic. Even though the vibration was slight, it covered a huge area. Fairy Xiongfeng's expression changed not only because of the vibration but also because of Xiao Hua's sharp senses. If not for Xiao Hua's warning, Fairy Xiongfeng wouldn't have noticed it. This must be another test. Fairy Xiongfeng's mouth was bitter as she looked at Xiao Hua and asked in a low voice. Xiao Hua looked around and nodded. "Yes, and it came from the path we had to pass. I'm afraid we can't avoid it." "If," Fairy Xiongfeng suggested, "we can avoid the trap first. With Daoist Xiao's ability, the trap won't be able to hurt us. Then, we can avoid the test." At this point, Fairy Xiongfeng didn't even want to continue. She knew that there was no need to test it. The trap before the hurricane and after the hurricane were definitely different. Since it was a test, even if they hid in the trap, they might not be able to avoid the test. "Let's go." Xiao Hua waved his hand. "Let's see what the test." "All right." Fairy Xiongfeng had no choice but to agree. "I will need your help in the next test." At the same time, Fairy Xiongfeng felt a sense of guilt. "That's right. Why did I come to the Misty Mountain Maze Formation? Daoist Xiao Hua to avenge Daoist Xiongtian." But, before she could do anything, Xiao Hua had helped her time and time again. Treasures, opportunities, and now, her life was saved by him several times. She even had to ask him to take care of her here. How could she do anything? Kill. Thinking of this, Fairy Xiongfeng wiped away her good intentions. There are no good men in this world. Xiao Hua is just trying to buy people's hearts. Roar. After walking for half a cup of tea's time, a huge brown bear charged over from afar. This brown bear was more than 10 zhong tall and its fur was standing on end. The brown bear was running on all fours. Occasionally, it would stand up and roar towards the sky. Its arms were waving crazily in the air. I understand. Seeing the brown bear, Fairy Xiongfeng immediately thought of the shape of the tunnel. How could she not know that this brown bear was the final test of the maze? But since it was the final test, the danger was self-evident. If it's just one or two, then it's fine. Xiao Hua was very calm. He squinted his eyes at the approaching brown bear and said, "If it's a group, then it will be troublesome." That's right. A light flashed in front of Fairy Xiongfeng. A spear appeared and floated in the air. I can't just hide. I'll help Daoist Xiao. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and continued to walk towards the brown bear. Fairy Xiongfeng reached out and grabbed the spear. A cold feeling came from the spear. Fairy Xiongfeng waved the spear and a gust of wind came. It was no different from a real spear. Fairy Xiongfeng looked again. She really did not understand how this space was set up. Could it be, tribulation-passing cultivators are really omnipotent in this cultivation world? Fairy Xiongfeng was a little excited. But soon, the excitement turned into a sigh. Pity. I won't be able to see my tribulation-passing realm in this life. Thump, thump, thump. As the brown bear ran, the ground beneath Fairy Xiongfeng's feet began to tremble. The bear, which was hundreds of feet long, now looked extremely ferocious. An unpleasant stench assaulted her nostrils. Fairy Xiongfeng could even clearly see the blood-red eyes of the brown bear. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to act, Fairy Xiongfeng roared. Kill, as if she wanted to vent the hatred in her heart, the spear in Fairy Xiongfeng's hand flew straight towards the chest of the brown bear. Roar! The spear was like lightning, and the brown bear went crazy. The bear's paw slapped on the spear, but the strength of the spear was enough. The bear's paw bounced back as if it had been electrocuted. Pu. The moment the bear's paw bounced back, the spear pierced the brown bear's chest. However, the long spear pierced through the bear's chest, and it flew straight for 100 meters before slowly disappearing. The brown bear still rushed forward for a few meters, then it fell to the ground and disappeared in a moment while howling. Good. Xiao Hua gave a thumbs up. Daoist Yunmeng is really good. Thank you, thank you. Fairy Xiongfeng said modestly. Another spear appeared in her hand. However, this time, Fairy Xiongfeng's gaze fell on Xiao Hua's throat. Dong, dong, dong. The ground shook again. Even more stench came from afar, and even more screams came from afar. Kill, kill, kill. Fairy Xiongfeng moved her gaze away from Xiao Hua and looked into the distance. That group of brown bears had turned into Xiao Hu's. When these brown bears were close enough, Fairy Xiongfeng roared and waved her arms. Spears flew out of her hands and killed the brown bears one after another. They fell down and disappeared. Seeing Fairy Xiongfeng so fierce, Xiao Hua was surprised. However, he didn't have time to think about Fairy Xiongfeng's transformation. He released his divine sense and looked at the seemingly endless brown bears. These brown bears were not like the hurricane from before. They were extremely lethal. Moreover, seeing Fairy Xiongfeng's spear attack, some of the brown bears were already able to block it. Needless to say, the brown bears behind were even more powerful. Presumably, the spear would not be able to kill them easily. What should he and Fairy Xiongfeng do when they encounter such a brown bear? Could it be Senior Kang Langzi really wants to kill the Dao sect juniors who enter the maze? Xiao Hua was confused. If that's the case, why did the previous maze have a cultivation technique? But if he only wants to test the cultivation of the cultivators who enter the maze, why does he have to kill them like this? Even with Yun Mengzi's late-stage Yuanian cultivation, he can't handle it. Ayo, I understand now. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. Kang Lungzi was an ancient cultivator who went through the tribulation. Let's not talk about his own cultivation, just the cultivation of the other Daoist seniors should be around the 7th or 8th stage. As for the 2 layers of formations that senior Kang Lungzi set up outside the maze, it would be difficult to break through without a 7th or 8th grade essence force. Therefore, the maze within the cave is naturally targeted at the 8th grade essence force. Even though the maze has been worn down for millions of years and its power is very weak, the maze within the cave is much weaker than the maze outside. Therefore, its power is much greater. Damn it, it seems like I have harmed everyone. If it weren't for Xiao Hua, Zhong Daoran, and the others wouldn't even be able to break through the outer formation, how could they enter the maze? If they couldn't enter the maze, they wouldn't lose their lives. Seeing how Fairy Xiongfeng was facing such a difficult situation, Xiao Hua could already imagine the danger Zun Kong and the others were facing. If they lost their lives, it would be Xiao Hua's fault. Xiao Hua couldn't help but recall what Fairy Jing had said to him in front of Heartbreak Mountain, as well as her advice to him. Yes, an ancient maze, it's not something we can easily enter with the Dao sect in its declining state. Xiao Hua sighed and condensed his spiritual will into a hammer. Boom! The hammer fell and several brown bears were reduced to nothingness as they howled in grief. Ah! Fairy Xiongfeng was caught unprepared. She cried out in surprise and the spear in her hand stopped moving. Looking at the hammer that destroyed several brown bears, she fell into a daze. She knew in her heart that although her spear was powerful, the spear itself was made of spiritual will. Every time she used it, she would consume some of it. Her already sore Niwen palace was now in a tearing pain. She simply could not hold on for too long. But looking at Xiao Hua, his spiritual will was like a hammer. How much spiritual will did he consume? Could it be that Xiao Hua didn't consume much spiritual will in the hurricane? -13. Chapter 3747. Daoist Master Xiao. Fairy Xiongfeng suddenly felt a sense of relief. She laughed and said, "Since we can't retreat, why don't we just charge forward? We can kill as many brown bears as we can. This old man is satisfied to be able to die together with Daoist Master Xiao. Good. As you wish." Xiao Hua was also filled with lofty sentiments. He loudly responded and pounced towards the brown bears. As Xiao Hua's figure moved, boom, boom, boom. Huge rumbling sounds came from midair. The entire space shook. Huge rocks fell from the sky like falling stars, smashing towards the thousands of brown bears. Fairy Xiongfeng was stunned for a moment. She smiled bitterly and also charged forward. The long spear in her hand stabbed out. Fairy Xiongfeng had already made her decision. Perhaps only if she died under the paws of the brown bears would she not hesitate to kill Xiao Hua. Perhaps if she and Xiao Hua both died here, she would be able to take revenge for Daoist Master Xiong Tian. As the two of them charged into the group of brown bears, an apocalyptic scene appeared. Huge rocks fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. Along with the deafening sound, the brown bears disappeared one by one. Although there was no smoke or dust, within a radius of a few li, there were cries and cries everywhere. Fairy Xiongfeng first tried her best to use her spiritual sense to kill the brown bears. However, after an unknown period of time, her spiritual sense had already dried up. Not to mention the long spear, she could not even condense a blade of grass. At the same time, Fairy Xiongfeng did not know how long she had been running with Xiao Hua. A fatigue that she had not felt in 1,000 years appeared in her body. When she looked at Xiao Hua again, she saw that he was no longer as vigorous as before. The falling rocks in the sky had also become sparse. However, the brown bears in front of Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiongfeng were still endless. They could not kill them all. "Xiong Tian, this concubine will follow you. You will not be lonely in the underworld," Fairy Xiongfeng muttered in her heart. Her body also slowed down. Damn it. Seeing Fairy Xiongfeng land, Xiao Hua also stopped. He shouted, "Daoist Yun Meng, hold on for a while longer. I'm afraid this old man cannot hold on anymore." Fairy Xiongfeng smiled sadly. This old man, although I was prepared and thought of the ending, this old man never thought of the process. Ending? Process. Xiao Hua was startled. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He looked at the brown bears that filled his vision, then turned back to look at the sky from before. He said confidently, Daoist El Ma, please wait a moment. I understand. Spiritual Master Xiao. Fairy Xiong Feng was slightly surprised. She raised her head and saw several huge rocks exploding in mid-air. Each of the huge rocks formed a huge whirlpool. These whirlpools quickly gathered at one spot and finally formed a whirlpool that was dozens of feet in size. This whirlpool spun rapidly and gradually expanded. As it expanded, the suction force increased as well. Awoo! At first, the brown bears didn't care at all and pounced on Xiao Hua and the others. But before they could get close, the vortex sucked them in. When the suction force was enough, the brown bears flew up from the ground and landed in the vortex. Not only that, as the brown bears landed in the vortex expanded again and pounced on the ground. Sigh. Fairy Xiong Feng saw this and immediately understood Xiao Hua's intention. This was an unimaginable idea. Since spiritual will could condense into anything, then the brown bears were naturally condensed by something similar to spiritual will. Xiao Hua used his spiritual will to condense into a vortex and used his unimaginable spiritual will to push the vortex to suck the brown bears into the vortex. Then, not only could he kill the brown bears, after the brown bears were killed, their spiritual will would fuse into the vortex and increase the suction force of the vortex. This way, the vortex would be pushed one after another. Naturally, it was much more effective than the falling rocks and spears. Go! Xiao Hua shouted. His face was as pale as paper. However, the huge vortex had already escaped from Xiao Hua's control and slowly flew into the distance. As the vortex flew, more and more brown bears were sucked in. Boom! Xiao Hua's body fell to the ground. He groaned in extreme exhaustion and said, Daoist El Ma, this Xiao's Niwen Palace no longer has a trace of spiritual will. Let's rest for a while. Let's wait for this space to collapse. Rest is a must. Fairy Xiong Feng clenched her teeth. She stood up not far away and walked to Xiao Hua's side. She took out a few kai-long fang from her waist. This fang was blood red and almost transparent. At the tip of the fang, there was a trace of black. Furthermore, Daoist Xiao does not need to worry about resting anymore. Daoist El Ma? What is the meaning of this? Xiao Hua lay on the ground weakly. Seeing Fairy Xiong Feng walking over with her fang, he asked curiously. Ha ha! Fairy Xiong Feng saw Xiao Hua's confusion and laughed. What meaning can this concubine have? This concubine is only here to take the life of another. You. Xiao Hua was shocked. He hurriedly tried to crawl up from the ground. Unfortunately, after struggling for a while, he could only barely sit up. He looked at Fairy Xiong Feng and said, You are not El Ma? Of course this concubine is not El Ma. Fairy Xiong Feng laughed sharply. This concubine is Fairy Xiong Feng. You personally killed that Reverend Xiong Tian's dual cultivation partner. How is this possible? Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xiong Feng and said in shock, You are clearly a male cultivator. Before I reached the Yuanying stage, I was naturally a male cultivator. Fairy Xiong Feng smiled sinisterly, but after reaching the Yuanying stage, I became a female. I understand. Xiao Hua had already calmed down. He nodded and said, This Xiao has heard about your matter. At that time, this Xiao also sympathized with you. Sympathize? Is there any use in sympathizing? Fairy Xiong Feng's face showed loneliness. Sympathy can only be cheered by the weak. When I reached the late Yuanying stage, there was no sympathy in this world. Forget it. Since you want to take revenge for Reverend Xiong Tian, this Xiao also has nothing to say. However, this Xiao has already told you the ins and outs of the matter clearly. Xiao Hua sighed and said, Although you love Reverend Xiong Tian, your love is already a burden. It is this love that led Reverend Xiong Tian to his death. Perhaps this Xiao will let him off in this Jade Pavilion gathering. However, there will be a day when he will die from his arrogance. No matter what, whoever killed Xiong Tian, I will kill that person. Fairy Xiong Feng said coldly, I do not care who is right or wrong. Xiao Hua stared at Fairy Xiongfeng and asked, even if it is your life savior? That's right. Fairy Xiongfeng replied without hesitation, Reverend Xiao has saved me many times. I have long remembered it in my heart. Previously, I also had many opportunities to kill Reverend Xiao Hua, but I was hesitating, because this space is truly dangerous. No one can guarantee that they will be able to leave alive. If Reverend Xiongtian and I were to die here, I naturally would not kill anyone. Unfortunately, Reverend Xiao's methods are heaven-defying. Such a difficult problem was easily solved by you. I have no choice but to take action. However, Reverend Xiao, please do not worry. I will not live alone. As long as Reverend Xiao dies in my hands, I will immediately commit suicide to repay Reverend Xiao for saving my life. Just based on the fang in your hand? Xiao Hua said coldly, do you think that it can pierce through this Xiao's diamond body? Reverend Xiao, I am afraid that you do not know what I am holding in my hand. Fairy Xiongfeng said coldly, this is a venomous dragon fang. Not only is it incomparably sharp, it is also extremely poisonous. Even if you have cultivated some diamond body, you will not be able to block this fang. The venomous dragon fang might not be able to pierce you to death, but the poison is enough to kill you. Sigh. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. Fear appeared on his pale face. However, after a moment, Xiao Hua sighed, forget it. This Xiao is indeed too kind. Although your background is somewhat strange, this Xiao did not look into it. This entire time, I have been taking care of you, protecting you to this place. Since you insist on taking this Xiao's life, this Xiao does not even have the strength to truss a chicken. I can only let you do as you wish. Come, as long as you do not let down your conscience, then do it. Conscience. Is there still a conscience in this world? Fairy Xiongfeng was somewhat agitated. When I was being bullied by those filthy people, where did their conscience go? Where are those people with a conscience? The suffering that I went through, who would know? Whenever this concubine is mentioned, who would think of the suffering that this concubine went through? They only think of filthy people. They only know how to say that my methods are ruthless. There were cultivators who came to bully me after I formed my nascent soul. They keep saying that they look up to me. Where did their conscience go? Although Xiangtian is somewhat arrogant, he always protects me and gives in to me in everything. He never mentions anything that makes me unhappy. In my eyes, he is the one with the most conscience. Just for this so-called conscience, you go against your conscience to kill this Xiao? Xiao Hua said coldly, what is the difference between you and those people who humiliated you? There is no point in saying more, Daoist Xiao. Fairy Xiongfeng raised the venomous dragon fang and said indifferently, if not for the fact that you are my savior, I would definitely not say so much to you. I would definitely not let you know the truth. As she spoke, the venomous dragon fang descended like lightning. However, before it even landed halfway, Fairy Xiongfeng's hands began to tremble. Her entire body began to tremble and tears began to flow from her eyes. Who knows how many years she had persevered, but at this moment, she finally collapsed. Fairy Xiongfeng raised her hand and shouted towards the sky, Xiangtian, you are forcing this concubine. Although this concubine has always doted on you and this concubine has never allowed you to do anything outrageous, how much have you done behind this concubine's back? Do you think this concubine does not know? This concubine has always been lucky and felt that perhaps no one would dare to touch you. However, this concubine knows that if you continue to act like this, something will happen sooner or later. Xiangtian, it is not that this concubine does not want to take revenge for you. However, if this concubine kills Daoist Xiao, this concubine is no better than a pig or a dog. What is the difference between this concubine and those animals? Xiangtian, wait for this concubine will follow you. As she spoke, Fairy Xiongfeng raised the venomous dragon fang and descended towards her snow-white neck. -13. Chapter 37:48. However, the moment the venomous dragon tooth was about to land, a powerful force grabbed Fairy Xiongfeng's hand. Who? Fairy Xiongfeng turned pale with fright and looked around. There is no one else in this space. Xiao Hua stood up with a smile on his face and said with a smile. Fairy Xiong Feng looked like she saw a ghost and said in shock, You, don't ask me if I'm fine. Xiao Hua shrugged. This Xiao is naturally fine. How can you be fine? Even if it's a 7th grade spirit sense, it would be unavoidable for it to dry up here, right? Fairy Xiong Feng was shocked. Then, she exclaimed, Could it be that you already knew that I am Fairy Xiong Feng? He, spirit sense, let's not talk about it. That's this Xiao's secret, I can't tell my enemies. Xiao Hua said with a smile, but speaking of your reason, this Xiao was already vigilant and was basically certain. How did you know? Since you were suspicious and even certain, why did you save me? Fairy Xiong Feng was confused. Xiao Hua shrugged and said with a smile, Firstly, when Fairy was breaking the seal in the cave, you didn't use your natal magic artifact at the start. Presumably, you were trying to hide something. Fairy Xiong Feng clenched her teeth and didn't say anything. You let Di Quan lead the way and hide yourself. You thought that nobody would know, but Di Quan's occasional questions were all directed at Fairy. Doesn't that mean you're the mastermind? Especially, when choosing the passage, Di Quan and the rest rushed to choose others. Obviously, they wanted to leave this Xiao last and be separated with you. Isn't that a flaw? Because they knew you wanted to kill this Xiao and they knew they weren't my match. Since you knew you weren't my match and still wanted to kill this Xiao, then if you're not Fairy Xiong Feng, who are you? Also, even though Fairy changed your appearance and your Yuanying is also a male, the fragrance on Fairy's body is still there. This can't help but make this Xiao suspicious. Fairy Xiong Feng bit her lips and retorted, That's what you thought after the fact. Xiao Hua ignored Fairy Xiong Feng and said, As for why I saved you, it's because you're different from Fairy Shu Ming. Fairy Shu Ming is extremely arrogant and wanted to perish together with me when she saw me. As for you, even though your temperament has changed greatly, this is all because of the evil others have done to you. So you chose to fight evil with evil. What's more, once you cultivate to the 4th grade of Essence Force, others will fear you. You won't be able to experience the kindness of others. This Xiao feels that if you can experience the good in this world, perhaps, the evil in your heart will decrease. Therefore, this Xiao cannot not save you. This Xiao hopes that there will be more good in this world. Fairy Xiong Feng's tears flowed down as if no one had ever said such words to her in her life. With evil in one's heart, no matter how high one's cultivation is, one's heart won't be calm, and one's foundation won't be firm. Only with kindness in one's heart can one have a clear path between heaven and earth. Xiao Hua continued, Back then, I met a fish called Little Cabbage. Xiao Hua narrated the story of Little Cabbage, causing Fairy Xiong Feng's face to be filled with tears and grief. Finally, Xiao Hua smiled and said, And you did not disappoint this Xiao. There's a saying in Buddhism that one can become a Buddha by letting go of the butcher's knife. Fairy is that fearless Buddha, a Buddha that has cut off the evil in your heart, a Buddha that has cut off everything from your past. I believe that with today's kindness and resolution, as well as the comprehension in the maze array, Fairy's future will be immeasurable. This concubine understands. Fairy Xiong Feng stopped crying and said with a choked voice, Many thanks Daoist for your explanation. Even though this concubine cannot let go of the hatred in my heart, this concubine will try to think of Daoist's kindness in the future and treat people with kindness. Good, if Fairy understands, this Xiao will let you go. Xiao Hua nodded, but, if you let go of the venomous dragon tooth, this Xiao will take it away to prevent any more evil thoughts in your heart. This concubine understands. Fairy Xiong Feng let go of the venomous dragon tooth and Xiao Hua also retracted his Buddha sense. As soon as Xiao Hua retracted his Buddha sense, Fairy Xiong Feng immediately collapsed to the ground. Her state of mind changed so drastically in such a short period of time, it was really hard for her to accept. Without arcane energy, she was no different from an ordinary female cultivator. Catcher. At this time, a crisp cracking sound came from the distance, and cracks filled the sky in an instant. It was Xiao Hua who had used the space to condense the vortex, and used the space's divine sense to break the space's restriction. Following the space's rupture, divine sense attacks that were 100 times more powerful than the soul stab swept across the sky, as if the space was struggling on its deathbed. How could Fairy Xiongfeng withstand these divine sense attacks? She screamed and fainted on the ground. On the other hand, layers of golden light appeared outside Xiao Hua's Niwen Palace as the innate divine restriction blocked the attacks. Wang. The moment the space cracked, Xiao Hua sensed the heaven and earth Yuan Qi. He quickly slapped his hand and summoned the Kunlun mirror. While keeping Fairy Xiongfeng into the Kunlun ruins, he also kept the venomous dragon tooth into his spatial dimension. Sigh, poor Fairy Xiongfeng. Xiao Hua kept the Kunlun mirror and sighed in his heart. Just as he said, if Fairy Xiongfeng was like Fairy Xu Ming and attacked without any care, Xiao Hua would not hold back either. However, with Fairy Xiongfeng's probing and Xiao Hua's vigilance, Xiao Hua gradually recalled the words about Fairy Xiongfeng's background. As the saying goes, a pitiful person must have a hateful side. At the same time, a hateful person would also have a pitiful side. Ordinary people with a compassionate heart would sigh at Fairy Xiongfeng's background, not to mention Xiao Hua, a cultivator with a compassionate heart of a Buddhist sect. Along the way, Xiao Hua was both on guard and enlightening her. Now, it seemed that it was still very effective. Fairy Xiongfeng was able to rein in the horse at the last moment. It could not be said that she had thrown away her burden, but at least, she was not ruthlessly destroyed by Xiao Hua. After this lesson, this poor person might have an epiphany. With the gains from the Misty Mountain Maze formation, her cultivation level will also improve. Her life will be exciting again. At this moment, the space within the maze formation collapsed and the surroundings were in chaos. The omnipresent waves were more powerful than a forest of blades and spears, wreaking havoc in the entire space. The target of these waves was the Niwen Palace. If it were not for the innate divine restriction outside Xiao Hua's Niwen Palace, he would have been rolling on the ground in pain. If it were a serious injury, his Niwen Palace would have been torn apart by the waves. This Xiao is really lucky. Xiao Hua could sense that the innate divine restriction in his Niwen Palace was flashing with golden light. Layers upon layers of divine miracles that seemed to be in a deep slumber began to awaken. One after another, ordinary or strange star charts appeared above his Niwen Palace, revealing their majesty amidst the golden light. Xiao Hua could not help but sigh, I wonder where this innate divine restriction came from. It has saved this Xiao's life time and time again. Hornwood dragon, fighting wood vermin, Kuei wood wolf, these are the real innate divine restrictions. How can those sinners of Star-Lord Palace represent them? That's right, other than the rabbit in the capital Sky Star formation and the rooster in the plentiful Sun Devil devouring immortal formation, there were even more lightning dragons, tigers, and leopards appearing in the golden light. The original names of these innate divine restrictions did not matter. No one knew if they existed or not. Since the Immortal Palace or the Tao sect gave these rather interesting names based on the appearance of these innate divine restrictions, they would be called these names. If the Immortal Palace could use them, so could the Tao sect. With the activation of the innate divine restriction, traces of obscure waves rushed into Xiao Hua's space. They either landed on the green-robed Xiao Hua's body or in the starry sky of the Tao of Heaven Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua understood that this was the comprehension of the innate divine restriction. If his 10 avatars could comprehend all of these divine restrictions, his cultivation would definitely improve beyond his wildest dreams. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua's avatar rushed into the space. He ignored the green-robed Xiao Hua and landed in the starry sky. He cupped his hands and said, Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, I greet you. There was no sound or movement in the starry sky. However, Xiao Hua knew that Tao of Heaven Tao had heard him. He continued, I know that this innate divine restriction is very abstruse. Ordinary cultivators can't comprehend it. Even if it's the green-robed Tao friend, his main body wouldn't allow him to comprehend the abstruse of the divine restriction. Only Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, whose main body is the abstruse of the Tao of Heaven, is able to comprehend this innate divine restriction naturally. Furthermore, you won't suffer any backlash from the divine restriction. You will be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, on behalf of the other Tao friends, I earnestly request Tao friend to comprehend these innate divine restrictions. The entire starry sky suddenly stopped. It was very strange. However, in just a moment, the waves coming from the Niwen Palace seemed to be grabbed by a big hand and didn't go anywhere else. They were all thrown into the starry sky. It was like a stone thrown into the water. In an instant, the entire starry sky became alive again. At the same time, waves of comprehension rushed towards Xiao Hua like a mountain flood and a tsunami. Xiao Hua hurriedly cut off these comprehensions. He smiled bitterly and said, "Dao friend, Dao of heaven, Dao, I'll leave these comprehensions with you first. When I have the time, I'll slowly absorb them. Although you and I have the same comprehension, this huge amount of comprehension is enough to make I explode." Following Xiao Hua's voice, the huge amount of waves instantly disappeared and turned into a trickle. "Many thanks, Dao friend." Xiao Hua cupped his hands and came out of the space. However, just as Xiao Hua's consciousness came out, he immediately felt that something was wrong. This was because when Xiao Hua entered this spiritual sense space, he was inside the passage of the misty mountain maze formation. Although this passage was tall and spacious, it was still limited. If the spiritual sense space collapsed, the passage would inevitably be revealed. Now, the spiritual sense attack in the entire space had already disappeared. The feeling of light had already weakened. The passage from before still hadn't revealed itself. In particular, Xiao Hua felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly released his Buddhist sense. Although his Buddhist sense couldn't be compared to his spiritual sense, it still couldn't find the end of the space. -13. Chapter 3749. This is. Xiao Hua, who had already grasped the pearl of wisdom, began to wonder. He couldn't imagine what kind of difficulties there would be after the test of the divine sense space. Boom, boom, boom. Just as Xiao Hua released his Buddhist sense to explore his surroundings, suddenly, from the four corners of the space, 4 pillars of air and qi soared into the sky and wrapped around Xiao Hua. The 4 pillars of boundless qi fell from the sky and condensed into 4 strange shapes. They looked like beasts, but also like something else. They couldn't be identified. Once these 4 boundless qi forms were formed, a kind of aura that could suppress everything was emitted from them. It quickly filled the entire space. What was special was that these 4 similar auras were mixed together like water and milk. They surged and rushed towards Xiao Hua. Not only that, when the auras sealed the space, thousands of inscriptions gushed out from the 4 air and qi forms, condensing into sentences and articles one by one, and finally forming a book that covered the entire space. How can this be? Is it possible that they want to test the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator now? Xiao Hua was completely puzzled, somewhat at a loss. Who? Suddenly, Xiao Hua's eyes widened, and a fierce look flashed through his eyes. He switched his Buddhist sense to soul sense and looked below one of the air and qi forms. Following Xiao Hua's stern shout, a Confucian cultivator wearing a brocade robe came out from the air and qi pillars, but this Confucian cultivator was in a very sorry state. Not only was his hair abnormally messy, but his brocade robe was also torn to pieces. At this time, the Confucian cultivator was holding a square-shaped imperial tool in his hand. Clouds lingered inside, and wisps of air and qi formed from the void and fell on it. As soon as the Confucian cultivator stepped into the air, he immediately looked at Xiao Hua in surprise. His thick eyebrows trembled slightly, and he asked curiously, "Huh? Your divine sense hasn't been exhausted yet? How did you find this old man?" Xiao Hua didn't answer the Confucian cultivator's question. He looked at the imperial tool in the Confucian cultivator's hand, then narrowed his eyes and looked at the air and qi that had already merged together in the air. At this time, how could he not know that this was the Confucian cultivator's origin array? How could he not know that he had fallen into the Confucian cultivator's trap? However, he was very puzzled. Where did this Confucian cultivator come from? How did this Confucian cultivator follow him? How did this Confucian cultivator avoid the spiritual force storm in the spiritual force dimension? Moreover, how did this Confucian cultivator set up such an origin formation in such a short period of time? Sir, as long as you tell me who you are and why you set up this defensive formation, I will tell you how I discovered you, Xiao Hua coldly replied. Defensive array? Haha, You really are a half-baked Confucian cultivator. The Confucian cultivator laughed and said, our Confucian cultivator's array formation is called the origin array. How can it be called the imperial array? The so-called primordial array is also called defensive array is nothing but nonsense. This Xiao's lack of skill is my own problem. I don't need others to lecture me. Xiao Hua stared at the Confucian cultivator and asked, I heard that Confucian cultivators are most particular about not changing their names. May I know what your name is? Hihi, you are indeed sharp-tongued. It is no wonder that Duanmu Qing lost to you. The Confucian cultivator chuckled and said without hiding anything. Hearing this Confucian cultivator mention Duanmu Qing, Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Confucian cultivator's thick eyebrows and said thoughtfully, so you are from the Duanmu family? That's right. This old man is Duanmu Liangsheng. The Confucian cultivator ignored Xiao Hua's gaze and calmly replied. Saitilda seeing this, Xiao Hua sighed and said, although this Xiao is very respectful to Confucian cultivator families, the Duanmu family has really disappointed this Xiao. The reason for this Xiao's enmity with Duanmu Qing is very simple. For this small matter, your Duanmu family first lent a scroll to help the state preceptor of the Bronze Pillar Nation. Now, you even sent your excellency to kill this Xiao from afar. Is this the action of a proper Confucian cultivator family? Moreover, this Xiao remembers that Duanmu Qing is only a scholar. In order to deal with this Xiao, the Duanmu family actually sent out a great grandmaster. Don't you think this is shameful? Duanmu Liangsheng smiled slightly and stretched out his hand to tidy up the scattered hair on his head. He said, fortunately, this old man came. If it was someone else, wouldn't it be like throwing a meat bun to a dog? As he spoke, Duanmu Liangsheng raised his eyes and looked to the left and said, to be honest, this clan order should not have been accepted by this old man. However, this old man just happened to want to avoid trifling matters within the clan. Therefore, I took the initiative to go to Black Wind Ridge to find you. But what this old man did not expect was that Black Wind Ridge actually had another scenery. With this old man's cultivation, I could not easily enter the formation. This old man already had a premonition in his heart that you were going to give this old man a surprise. When this old man knew that you were going to Yarutai Mountain to participate in the Yarutai gathering, this old man purposely waited for you along the way. Although this old man did not manage to wait for you, this old man heard of Daoist Master Xiao's great name from the mouths of some nascent soul cultivators. At that time, this old man could not help but have a whole new level of respect for you. How could you be the little Confucian cultivator that Duanmu Qing spoke of who only had the strength of a second or third grade essence force? You could even assassinate the state teacher of the Bronze Pillar State and even participate in the Yarutai gathering. If you did not have the strength of a fourth grade essence force, this old man's name, Duanmu, would be erased from this old man's name. Moreover, looking at this spiritual sense space, damn it, even this old man's spiritual sense has been messed up. If this old man did not have our imperial equipment passed down from my ancestors, this old man is afraid that before this old man could even see you, I would have been buried here, right? Since that is the case, how confident do you think you are? Xiao Hua looked at this opponent whose strength was second only to Kong Hongwu and asked indifferently. 90%. Duanmu Liangsheng said with great confidence. Oh. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, you are very conceited. Of course, Duanmu Liangsheng said with a smile, you only have the strength of a fourth grade essence force, while this old man has the strength of a fifth grade intermediate essence force. How can you be this old man's opponent? Moreover, if there is no accident, this spiritual sense space should have been broken by you, right? This old man does not think that. You still have much spiritual sense in your Niwen Palace. Lastly, since you are proficient in the array formation of the passageway, you must have seen that you and I are currently inside an essence formation. This essence formation was set up by this old man at the risk of exhausting my spiritual sense. With this essence formation, this old man can replenish the true chi and spiritual sense that I had previously exhausted. If this old man did not have a kind of warning sign, I would definitely say that I am 100% confident. You have calculated very well. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, however, If you used this scheme to bully the weak, even this Xiao would feel ashamed. Duanmu Liangsheng smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, "You are wrong. Today, this old man only needs to kill you here. Who would know that this old man came here? Who would know that my Duanmu family had once made a move against you? You have said so much. Could it be that you want to wait for this old man to show mercy? Could it be that you want to wait for other cultivators? No, this Xiao only wants to confirm whether or not you deserve to be killed." Xiao Hua took a deep breath and said coldly as he looked at Duanmu Liangsheng. "Ha ha, ha ha ha, Xiao Hua, you are really too arrogant." Duanmu Liangsheng laughed, and at this moment, Xiao Hua's whole body suddenly produced a strange fluctuation. His whole body was like a breeze blowing, and in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at Duanmu Liangsheng's side. He raised his hand and took out the wishful steel staff. Boom! It smashed down with a bang. Puff puff puff. Just as the wishful steel staff fell, dozens of great spirit chi were born in mid-air. Although the wishful steel staff was like a hot knife through butter, when the wishful steel staff fell on Duanmu Liangsheng's body, his figure had already turned into an afterimage, and Duanmu Liangsheng's figure had already appeared in another place. Spirit refining. Xiao Hua was slightly surprised. Duanmu Liangsheng proudly said, "Yes, this old man has already killed a spirit-refining great master, Xiao Hua. You are not this old man's opponent, so obediently surrender. This old man will not take your life, and will only capture you back to the clan. As far as this old man knows, the clan may not punish you too severely. This Xiao Hua has seen many sanctimonious hypocrite. If this Xiao Hua falls into the hands of you Confucian cultivators, you will not say such things again," Xiao Hua said coldly. He knew that the news of his great strength must have been reported to the Duanmu family by Duanmu Qing, and this Duanmu Liangsheng must have been prepared. In this elemental formation, Duanmu Liangsheng almost had the ability to teleport, and Xiao Hua could not do anything with the wishful steel staff alone. Just as Xiao Hua raised his hand and was about to take out the seal of overturning the sea or the Kunlun mirror, Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and came up with a plan in his heart. He waved his hand and a golden light flashed out, striking towards Duanmu Liangsheng's neck. At the same time, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead with his hand. Rumble. Numerous pillars of righteous qi that were much thicker than the usual pillars of righteous qi came out from the origin formation. What was special was that there were 4 pillars of righteous qi that were as thick as a thumb that rushed out from the 4 monstrous righteous qi and landed on Xiao Hua's body along with the other righteous qi pillars. Wung wung. 2 deafening sword cries were produced from Xiao Hua's body, and 2 green and red sword lights flew out, flying towards Duanmu Liangsheng's chest. Ah! Xiao Hua's soaring dragon shears was extremely fast. Once it was swung out, it immediately landed a few feet away from Duanmu Liangsheng. Duanmu Liangsheng cried out in alarm, and his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, his back was already drenched in cold sweat. He almost did not even have the chance to activate the elemental formation. Duanmu Liangsheng was still afraid, and raised his hand. A green and bewitching light was produced from his fingers, and a verdant flying sword flashed with a dazzling brilliance and appeared in mid-air. At the same time, the flying sword in Xiao Hua's mouth had turned into a rainbow and once again rushed towards Duanmu Liangsheng's chest. True Qi. Sword Qi. Duanmu Liangsheng was stunned. How do you also have Confucian true Qi? However, Duanmu Liangsheng was only stunned for a moment. He waved the long sword in his hand, and like a peacock spreading its tail, a fan-shaped sword light immediately appeared in mid-air. Each sword light was composed of tens of thousands of sword splendors, and each sword splendor had crazily rotating inscriptions. Xiao Hua's flying sword fell on this sword light, and with a loud boom-boom, a series of qi waves rose up, and one by one, the inscriptions were torn apart. The entire sword light was broken by more than half, but the 2 flying swords' sword power was still block. -13. Chapter 3750. Duanmu Liangsheng looked at Xiao Hua's flying swords in disbelief. He really did not expect that Xiao Hua, a half-baked Confucian cultivator, would have such strength. Furthermore, Xiao Hua's flying swords were so powerful. However, Duanmu Liangsheng was still in shock. He saw the brilliance of the two flying swords converge, and then the awe-inspiring qi within 100 feet seemed to be boiling and surging toward the green sword light. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The violent sword hum once again resounded through the sky. A green flying sword of several 100 feet in size appeared out of thin air. As Xiao Hua's hands formed a sword seal, it carried a seemingly endless power as it slashed toward Duanmu Liangsheng. Under the sword light, an area of several 100 feet was shrouded. An indescribable feeling of palpitations rose from the bottom of Duanmu Liangsheng's heart, causing him to involuntarily stagnate. It was also during this stagnation that the huge sword light landed on the sword brilliance that had yet to be completely destroyed. The seemingly sharp sword brilliance was torn apart with a slash sound, and on Duanmu Liangsheng's forehead, a rarely seen layer of goosebumps appeared. The reason why Duanmu Liangsheng laid down the primary formation was not only because of the excessive consumption of his divine sense, but also because he had used some secret techniques when contending with the divine sense space. He had no choice but to rely on the awe-inspiring qi of the primary formation. In particular, in his plan, within this primary formation, he could rely on his divine sense to transform into nothingness, as well as the means of a Confucian cultivator to move around everywhere. Even when facing Xiao Hua, who was at the upper fourth level of divine sense, he would still be in an invincible position. However, he did not expect that Xiao Hua actually had the strength to transform into a sword and could also use the awe-inspiring qi of the primary formation. Therefore, when faced with the sword light that carried the power of the primary formation, the first thing he thought of was to dodge. Duanmu Liangsheng's figure swayed and was about to disappear. However, at this moment, the green sword light trembled slightly. The space of several 100 feet flashed with fine sword light at the same time. The sword light emitted a piercing sword qi. Although the sword qi and sword light could not be seen by Duanmu Liangsheng, there were so many sword lights that it actually produced a kind of confinement force, dragging his body down. As the sword qi permeated the awe-inspiring qi, the confinement force became stronger and stronger. Damn it! Duanmu Liangsheng did not know whether to laugh or cry. This is the primary formation that I set up. I'm the one in charge of the primary formation. Why does it feel like I'm a pigeon in a magpie's nest? Boom! Duanmu Liangsheng waved his sleeves and a vast wave of energy surged out from his body. It surged towards the green sword qi and sword beam. However, at this moment, Kang! Another sword hum was heard. After the green sword beam, another red sword beam soared into the sky. It was much sharper and more imposing than the green sword beam from before. It came crashing down on Duanmu Liangsheng. When Duanmu Liangsheng saw the power of these two swords, he was even more surprised. It was far more shocking than when he discovered Xiao Hua's true strength. However, at the same time, he also wanted to test Xiao Hua's strength. He no longer urged the vast wave of energy. Instead, with a wave of his right hand, his right arm suddenly grew longer and thicker. The green flying sword from before once again appeared. As Duanmu Liangsheng urged his genuine qi and waved it out, Shua! A startling rainbow flew up even more gracefully than Xiao Hua's flying sword. Not only did it cut Xiao Hua's sword qi into two, it also ruthlessly slashed at the two flying sword. Keng keng! Seeing his own flying sword's imposing aura, Duanmu Liangsheng narrowed his eyes and used the eye-clearing technique to look at Xiao Hua. To Duanmu Liangsheng's surprise, Xiao Hua's expression changed slightly. He opened his mouth again and his two hands formed a sword seal. Another two sword beams flew out from his mouth. One of the sword beams was golden and extremely dazzling. The other was a faint green qi and its true luster could not be seen clearly. Once these two sword beams came out, an equally powerful sword aura was generated. They turned into two giant swords and pounced on Duanmu Liangsheng. Before the two flying swords even landed, the green and red flying sword from before chimed in with a sword hum. The sword qi that had been suppressed by the bamboo sword beam suddenly surged. Duanmu Liangsheng raised his eyebrows and was secretly surprised. This Xiao Hua, could it be that he obtained the lost sword technique of legalism? Otherwise, how could he display such an authentic Confucian sword technique? Go! Duanmu Liangsheng was shocked. He activated 20% of his vital qi on the flying sword in his hand. The bamboo sword beam expanded and blocked the aura of the 4 flying swords. Seeing that the 4 flying swords were about to collide with Duanmu Liangsheng's flying swords, Duanmu Liangsheng opened his mouth and activated the primary formation with his left hand. Keng keng. Duanmu Liangsheng heard 2 familiar sword hum. The corner of his mouth twitched involuntarily as he looked up again. To his surprise, Xiao Hua's sword force this time was even more ferocious than the previous 2 times. Before he could even see the sword light, a monstrous sword force had already rushed toward him. Especially when 2 streaks of misty green sword light appeared. 6 flying swords, 6 streaks of sword qi had already merged into one. Although the green-red sword light in front had already struck Duanmu Liangsheng's flying sword, the other 4 flying swords behind seemed to have reached him first. They struck at lightning speed at the same time. Ah! Duanmu Liangsheng could not help but exclaim. His body expanded rapidly and wisps of sword qi leaked out. It was as if thousands of tiny flying swords were rushing out of the air. Some pierced into the void, some pierced into Duanmu Liangsheng's Confucian robes, and some pierced into the billowing qi waves, keng keng. Just as Duanmu Liangsheng was forced to activate his vital qi to block Xiao Hua's 6 flying swords, the sword intent of the bamboo flying swords decreased. Duanmu Liangsheng heard 2 sword hum in his ears. How is this possible? Duanmu Liangsheng was dumbfounded. Duanmu Qing, did you make a mistake? How can this Xiao Hua be a Dao cultivator? He must be a disciple of the declining legalism, right? This is 8 swords in one breath. Other than legalism disciples, no one else can do this without legalism's secret technique. Furthermore, this Xiao Hua's first 3 flying swords were completely condensed from vital qi. Although the remaining 6 flying swords were not condensed, they no longer had a sword form. Isn't this the legalism's sword intent? Xiao Hua's 6 huge swords were destroyed by Duanmu Liangsheng's flying swords. However, only the sword beams and sword intent were destroyed. The condensed sword qi was only sent flying. When Xiao Hua's last 2 swords were unleashed, the 6 flying swords that were forced back by Duanmu Liangsheng surged with sword intent. 8 sword beams rushed toward Duanmu Liangsheng like a sun. Duanmu Liangsheng was astonished and felt that he was unstoppable. Duanmu Liangsheng did not have time to activate his flying swords. He hastily slapped his forehead. Buzz! 3-colored vital qi spewed out. When the vital qi landed in the air, it immediately merged with the vital qi of the primary array. Then, Duanmu Liangsheng's subbody rapidly formed. The moment the subbody appeared, it immediately clenched its fist. Within a radius of several hundred feet, the vital qi suddenly surged. The huge fist smashed toward the 8 sword beams. The fist's momentum was like thunder, causing the entire primary array to rumble. Clang, clang. Just as Duanmu Liangsheng's subbody was about to win, 2 more sword hums sounded. Duanmu Liangsheng's body trembled. His condensed subbody almost collapsed. Duanmu Liangsheng could not help but groan in his heart. This Xiao Hua, how many flying swords does he have? No, the sword hums are not right. Ouch. He has turned into a sword. Of course, the 2 sword hums were not the same as the previous one. The first hums were soft, but it was a breath of sword qi that flew out from Xiao Hua's body like a meteor. The second sword hums had the intention of 10,000 swords worshipping their ancestor. It resonated with the first sword hums. Immediately after, within the space of several dozen feet to the left of Xiao Hua, the noble spirit was swept away. Xiao Hua's own body emitted a sword aura. That sword aura was mixed with a soaring sword will and unyielding sword aura. It transformed into a sharp flying sword that charged towards the fist of the second body. Moreover, as Xiao Hua transformed into a sword, the 9 flying swords from before seemed to have transformed into a single flying sword. The strength of that flying sword was more than twice as strong as before. What a genius! Duanmu Liangsheng groaned. He could not help but admire this genius. Xiao Hua's cultivation is only at the upper 4th grade of essence force. To think that he has such attainments in the way of the sword. This is the first time this old man has seen someone like him. Although he is a disciple of the legalism sect and even has the cultivation of Taoism, he was captured by this old man just because of that small matter with Duanmu Qing. Who knows what kind of trouble he will cause? Shouldn't this old man make a decision? However, before Duanmu Liangsheng could make a decision, Xiao Hua's transformed flying sword was already close to him. Good. Seeing such power, Duanmu Liangsheng's heroic spirit was ignited. He had long forgotten about Xiao Hua's astonishing divine strength. He shouted, "This old man wants to see what cultivation you have. If you can withstand 3 punches from this old man will make the decision to let you go." Hearing Duanmu Liangsheng's words, Xiao Hua, who had already transformed into a sword, frowned. The killing intent in his heart gradually dissipated. He thought to himself, "Oh? As the saying goes, there are all kinds of birds in the forest. Why does this Duanmu Liangsheng's words sound more and more like the words of a human? Completely different from Duanmu Qing? Of course, I cannot rule out the possibility that this person is extremely scheming and wants to tempt me with his words. However, even so, I cannot rashly kill him at this moment. Not to mention the huge price I have to pay to kill him. If I kill him, won't the Duanmu family know about my strength? If I kill him, they will send over cultivators even more powerful than Duanmu Liangsheng. Since that is the case, why don't I keep Duanmu Liangsheng alive and use him as a cover for myself? Yes, I will do that. I will use this to trick the Duanmu family." Thinking of this, Xiao Hua's sword did not stop moving. He coldly said, "What a big talk. Eat my sword first." Seeing that Xiao Hua's sword was unparalleled, Duanmu Liangsheng's body waved his hands. His arms surged with a jade-green color. His fists also flashed with a jade-green sword light. Even the upper body of his body had turned into jade-green. -13. Chapter 3751. Boom. The 9 stars soaring sun flying sword pierced right in front of Duanmu Liangsheng. A violent sword chi rushed into his body. Duanmu Liangsheng's eyes were filled with a kind of fanaticism. His entire body shook violently like a roly-poly toy. Immediately after, there was a loud roar. Xiao Hua's sword body fell. Woo! Duanmu Liangsheng's huge body fell several dozen feet. At the same time, Duanmu Liangsheng let out an angry roar, break. His sword-like arms blossomed with an extremely resplendent light. Duanmu Liangsheng had actually used 70% of his qi to strike Xiao Hua's sword. Hiss! Although Duanmu Liangsheng's body was trembling and had fallen several hundred feet, he was still standing majestically. When he looked at Xiao Hua's sword form, he was sent flying with a loud bang. However, Xiao Hua's body was still in the form of a flying sword without any changes. Seeing this, Duanmu Liangsheng could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. However, just at this time, Xiao Hua's figure that was sent flying by the sword suddenly flashed with the color of lightning. Rumble. Several thunderbolts were produced from the sword. Immediately after, the 9 stars soaring sun flying swords were also attracted by these thunderbolts. One after the other, one after the other, one after the other. By the time Duanmu Liangsheng noticed, Xiao Hua's sword body and the 9 flying swords had already turned into a shadow in the sky. Oh, not good. Seeing Xiao Hua escape from his sight in an instant, Duanmu Liangsheng was stunned at first, then suddenly realized, this little guy actually wanted to escape from the beginning. It turns out that he did not intend to fight with this old man. Duanmu Liangsheng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hurriedly waved his body and several streams of air and qi rushed into the void like pearls. The moment the air and qi disappeared, the entire primary array shook violently. The 4 strange air and qi figures at the 4 corners of the primary array let out a series of chanting sounds. One after another, air and qi pillars rushed out from the figures and shot towards the place where Xiao Hua had disappeared to. Looking at Xiao Hua again, he turned into a sword and pierced into a corner of the origin formation with the sharpness of the 9 stars transit of the sun. However, the space was extremely distorted and countless inscriptions overflowed from the distorted space, flashing crazily. There was even a Howran Chi pillar that landed on the distorted space, trying to repair the torn gap. Open. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. His entire figure slightly separated from the sword and immediately took out the Kunlun mirror. Where his transcendence energy was activated, a beam of light rushed to the place where the space was torn apart. Catcher! A crisp sound rang out. The entire primordial formation was torn apart by a crack of several feet. Go! Xiao Hua didn't stop at all. His transformed sword once again activated the lightning escape. Together with his flying sword, he pierced through the gap and disappeared. Boom! The moment Xiao Hua disappeared, a big hand reached out in a flash. Unfortunately, it only caught a few streaks of lightning in the hand and did not even touch the flying sword body. Damn it! Duanmu Liangsheng's sub-body had teleported to the crack. He looked at the spot where Xiao Hua had disappeared and the crack was rapidly shrinking. He could not help but curse. The huge sub-body opened its mouth and a tricolored brilliance landed on the four objects. Boom! The entire space was shaking. The pillar of great chi, along with some colorful clouds, quickly fell into the objects. The primary formation was retracted and the true appearance of the maze was revealed. This was a rather large space. There were many waves of dharmic power in the surroundings. Under the waves of dharmic power, there were many forks in the space. In one of the forks, there was the sound of thunder and lightning. Damn it, you dare to play this trick with me? Fine, I'll play with you. I don't believe that I can't capture you. Duanmu Liangsheng was flustered and exasperated. In his heart, on one hand, Xiao Hua might be a junior. He wanted to give him face and let Xiao Hua go, but Xiao Hua did not appreciate it and escaped when he was caught off guard. On the other hand, Xiao Hua was only a 4th grade elemental energy cultivator while he was a 5th grade elemental energy cultivator. He had already lost face by dealing with Xiao Hua. Now that he let Xiao Hua escape, he really did not know how to explain it. Perhaps Duanmu Liangsheng's current mood was turning into anger out of humiliation. However, Duanmu Liangsheng did not expect that the real ending was not what he had imagined. It was his words just now, those words that came from the bottom of his heart, that really saved his life. Not only did Duanmu Liangsheng's pressure not redeem his face, but it also pushed him into the abyss of death. Xiao Hua's thunder escape was indeed fast, but the sound it made was also loud. Although there were many forks in the maze, Duanmu Liangsheng could easily chase after Xiao Hua. Moreover, because there were so many forks, the speed of the thunder escape was gradually limited. When Xiao Hua realized that he had changed to the wind escape, this wind escape was obviously not as fast as the thunder escape. Moreover, Duanmu Liangsheng was also proficient in flying. Although he was unable to catch up with Xiao Hua, he was still unable to shake him off. After flying for an hour, Duanmu Liangsheng suddenly realized that Xiao Hua had lost his way. Xiao Hua had already flown through the same forks more than once. The characteristics of these forks were very obvious. Duanmu Liangsheng only needed to take a glance to distinguish them. Moreover, Xiao Hua had actually rushed through them several times. Seeing this, Duanmu Liangsheng's eyes turned and a plan came to his mind. He secretly laid down an origin formation at the side of several forks where Xiao Hua would easily appear. Although he could only lay down a part of them each time, he could not stop Xiao Hua from flying so many times. Duanmu Liangsheng was so successful that even he himself did not dare to believe it. However, when he saw Xiao Hua once again rush through a simple origin formation that he had laid down, Duanmu Liangsheng opened his mouth and a mouthful of true energy fell into the void. Boom! A layer of clouds similar to the twilight emerged from the forks. Waves of awe-inspiring chi mixed with inscriptions blocked Xiao Hua's path. Why is there an origin formation in the cloudy mountain maze? When Xiao Hua saw the origin formation appear, he was first shocked. When he realized that the awe-inspiring chi in the void came from behind him, he was even more shocked. This old thing, how could he lay down an origin formation in front of me? Just as this thought appeared, Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror appeared again. Boom! Wherever the Kunlun mirror's light beam passed, layers of inscriptions melted. The origin formation that Duanmu Liangsheng had painstakingly laid down earlier was unable to stop Xiao Hua. Now, How could a simple defensive formation that was hastily laid down be a match for the Kunlun mirror? Xiao Hua's figure rushed through the origin formation. His eyes slightly narrowed, and the corners of his mouth curled into a mischievous smile. With a wave of his hand, dozens of fire talismans immediately flew to the surroundings of the secret passage. Then, Xiao Hua laid down another restriction in the secret passage and rushed into the distance again. This little guy's cultivation is ordinary, but his ability to escape is extraordinary. Seeing this broken origin formation, although Duanmu Liangsheng didn't think that a simple origin formation would be able to trap Xiao Hua, he merely wanted to use the origin formation to delay for a while. He couldn't help but smile bitterly to himself. However, he didn't remove the origin formation because he knew that if nothing unexpected happened, Xiao Hua would return to this place soon. Unfortunately, just as he rushed through the origin formation, he felt an obscure transcendence energy appear. Duanmu Liangsheng was slightly startled. He knew that he had touched some kind of restriction. He hurriedly urged his figure to retreat. Rumble. Xiao Hua's most adept fire talisman star formation had already rushed towards Duanmu Liangsheng. Duanmu Liangsheng waved his hand, and a tsunami-like awe-inspiring qi immediately wrapped around these exploding fire talismans. However, not only was this exploding energy powerful, it was also tricky. It was almost all-pervasive. As long as Duanmu Liangsheng's defense was the slightest bit weak, that energy would immediately drill into it. In particular, this secret passage had the restriction of the misty mountain maze formation. When that wave of qi rushed into the restriction still had the power to counterattack. It was as if Duanmu Liangsheng had touched the restriction of the misty mountain maze formation. For a moment, Duanmu Liangsheng was in a very sorry state. Even his Confucian attire was somewhat tattered. When he flew out from the smoke with his face covered in dust, Xiao Hua had already fled far away. Xiao Hua. Duanmu Liangsheng let out a long shout. The clouds under his feet actually gave birth to sword light. If this old man doesn't capture you today, this old man's surname isn't Duanmu. Unfortunately, how could Xiao Hua hear him? Just as Xiao Hua heard the faint sound of an explosion, a bright light flashed in his mind. He instantly understood how Duanmu Liangsheng had laid down the origin formation. Seeing that another fork in the road had appeared, he was just about to rush into one of them. Then, he immediately stopped, picked the one at the edge, and flew in. Furthermore, in order to create a diversion, Xiao Hua had even specially used the Devil Realm's concealment technique. It's just that Xiao Hua's hundreds of plans, after he had flown for the time it took to eat a meal, his figure had just turned out from a secret passage, and before he could recognize the other forks, he saw layer after layer of inscriptions covering the sky and covering the earth like grasshoppers, all of a sudden enveloping Xiao Hua within. As Xiao Hua's figure was blocked, layers of vast qi waves rushed out from the rock walls, drowning Xiao Hua. A kind of vast power tightly shackled Xiao Hua. Duanmu Liangsheng. Xiao Hua was flustered and exasperated. He shouted loudly, "This Xiao only feels that you are a straightforward person, different from Duanmu Qing's narrow-mindedness. This is why this Xiao doesn't want to meet you in a life and death battle. Since you are forcing me step by step, this Xiao will make you fearful at every step. Today, you will die here." As he spoke, the top of Xiao Hua's head spouted out a tricolored cloud. An abundant power pushed away the vast qi that was binding Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's figure flashed with a dark golden brilliance, and his transcendence golden body was displayed. Woo! Just as Xiao Hua's tricolored true qi rushed out, the entire origin formation emitted a strange sound. All the noble qi crazily trembled, and along with the trembling, a very small wind sound was born. Soon after, layers upon layers of noble qi began to rotate, and a huge rotating passage was born in front of Xiao Hua. This passage was perfectly straight, and it seemed to lead to the inside of the rock walls. It also seemed to be the end of the secret passage. No, this isn't Duanmu Old Ghost's origin formation. Doubts arose in Xiao Hua's heart, but he didn't have time to think too much. The revolving passage had a force that he couldn't resist pushing him forward. Moreover, in the distance, he felt an extremely familiar feeling. -13. Chapter 3752. Xiao Hua wanted to activate the lightning escape technique, but unfortunately, he couldn't activate the magic power in his meridians. His nascent soul was also imprisoned in his lower dantian. Only the true qi in his middle dantian was abnormally lively. This is really an origin array. Xiao Hua understood. However, this wasn't set up by Duanmu Liangsheng. It should be the origin array set up by Senior Kang Langzi. Thinking that this was an origin array set up by Kang Langzi and the bone tempering technique he obtained from the stone wall, Xiao Hua couldn't help but look forward to the familiar feeling in the distance. In his heart, he secretly pondered what this familiar feeling was. Xiao Hua thought of many possibilities, but when he arrived at this misty space and saw countless dark green clouds condensed into mountains, trees, beasts, and city walls, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. In the middle of the clouds, he saw a turtle shell that looked like the noon sun embedded in it. The turtle shell emitted a dark green color, and a vigorous aura filled the entire space. All the creatures condensed from clouds and mist seemed to be worshipping this brilliance. Turtle shell? Heaven's heart! Xiao Hua groaned and couldn't help but open his mouth. This turtle shell was actually hidden here. Looking at the brilliance and clouds, there must be a heaven's heart inside. Senior Kang Langzi's divine ability is so great, he actually hid the heaven's heart of a Confucian cultivator in this misty mountain maze formation. No wonder Confucian cultivators couldn't find the heaven's heart in the hidden immortal continent. Even Xin Xin, a disciple of a Confucian family, only had half a heaven's heart. No wonder the misty mountain maze formation's protection is so tight. If it wasn't for this maze formation, how could it protect the heaven's heart for thousands of years? If I didn't first activate the true qi in my chest and conceal the heaven's heart's aura, I'm afraid this origin array might not have brought me here. With a thought, Xiao Hua slapped the top of his head, and the tricolored heart of heaven rushed out of his dantian along with his zhen qi. The tricolored brilliance fell on the spatial clouds, and with the dark green color, it actually became a multicolored brilliance. Even though the Wanxiang in this space was condensed from clouds, it looked extremely similar to an ordinary object. When he looked at the tricolor heaven's heart again, it was attracted by the aura of the tortoise shell. It turned into a stream and landed near the tortoise shell, surrounding it. Fellow Daoist. Quickly let me out. At this moment, the scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua's voice trembled slightly, and he said anxiously, I seem to have understood a little. That's right. This really is the essence of Confucian cultivation. Xiao Hua was also overjoyed. He hurriedly patted his chest with his hand. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua charged into the space with his sword light. His tricolored body immediately produced a powerful suction force. Wind swirled and clouds surged. The objects formed by the surrounding clouds were all shattered and then rushed into Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body. Swish, swish, swish. There was a soft sound like falling leaves. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body couldn't help but swell. When Xiao Hua grew to 100 meters tall, he opened his mouth and a stream of qi fell on the tortoise shell and the tricolor heaven's heart. 4 rays of light rushed into them. The light around Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body flashed rapidly. His body slowly shrank until it was the same size as Xiao Hua. If it weren't for some differences in skin that were difficult to distinguish, this Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua would be almost exactly the same as Xiao Hua. Although Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua shrank, he didn't open his eyes. The aura of the tortoise shell didn't disappear because it entered Xiao Hua's body. Instead, because of the tricolor heaven's heart, this aura became even denser and gradually filled the entire space. Namo Metria Buddha. Xiao Hua very untimely chanted the name of Buddha, and his body slowly retreated to the side. At this time, Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua replaced Xiao Hua. At this time, Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua didn't have the appearance of standing out like before. He also didn't have the sword qi that could pierce the sky. All of the sword shapes had disappeared, and only a scholarly robe that seemed to be condensed from the pages of a book was on his body. Although there were still armor inscriptions flashing in his eyes, The inscriptions had a kind of upright and plain-spoken aura that was far stronger than that of an ordinary scholarly cultivator. A slender sword was casually hanging from Xiao Hua's waist. There was a scabbard on the sword, and the scabbard was still in the shape of a scroll. Faintly, an incomparably sharp sword chi would seep out from the gaps between the scabbard. The 8 flying swords that formed Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua had all condensed into one. The originally very obvious heart-shaped sword intent was now also hidden in Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body. The sharp edge was no longer suitable for the mediocre Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua, and could no longer show the mature Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua raised his hands, and his scholarly robe fluttered in the wind. The clouds and mist in the entire space seemed to spread through the entire space with Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's perception, and the clouds and mist in the entire space began to slowly change under Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's perception. At first, the transformation was extremely slow, as if it was stagnant. The entire space was deathly still. After an unknown period of time, perhaps a gust of wind blew, and a grass seed moved. This grass seed broke out of the ground and grew into a blade of grass. Then, thousands upon thousands of grass seeds moved, and thousands upon thousands of blades of grass grew out of the ground. A blade of grass, a tree, a mountain, a city, a chicken, a dog, a cow, a person, a speck of dust, a ray of light, a star, a world. There were more and more things in the entire space, and the changes became faster and faster. In the end, all things turned into flowing lights that flashed around Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua. After an unknown amount of time, all the flowing lights suddenly stopped. Then, with a boom, a burst of silent rumbling sounds, and the entire space was fragmented and destroyed. All things turned into a rotating cloud and mist. This rotating cloud and mist drew a strange arc in the air and fell on top of Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's head. Although Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua still hadn't opened his eyes, the cloud and mist fell down and merged into Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body without any resistance. The cloud and mist was like the finishing touch. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's body gradually emitted a multicolored light from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. When an indescribable liveliness and vitality appeared in Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's eyes, a scroll slowly unfolded in a certain place in the space, and spread to Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's feet. Congratulations, fellow immortal. Xiao Hua flew to Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's expression and cupped his hands with a smile. A solemn expression appeared on Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's face. He returned the greeting and said, "Congratulations, congratulations." However, it seems that fellow immortal still hasn't completely grasped the true essence of Confucian cultivation. There are still many questions that you don't understand. Xiao Hua's tone changed as he asked, "Fellow immortal." Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's face vividly showed bitterness. This is the true essence of cultivation that countless Confucian cultivators diligently seek. You and I came from a Daoist sect. Now that we have the fortune of being able to peek into the mysteries of heaven, what are you still not satisfied with? Right now, you and I have 4 of the 5 heavenly hearts. When we find the last heavenly heart, you and I will be able to gather the 5 energies and truly understand the secret of Confucian cultivation. Even if we gather all 5 heavenly hearts, I fear that it will still be difficult to find the true secret. Xiao Hua shook his head. If it was only the gathering of the 5 heavenly hearts, how could the 5 heavenly hearts fall apart? Wouldn't Confucian cultivators do everything possible to protect these 5 heavenly hearts? Who knows? Let's wait until we find the last heavenly heart. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua looked at the scroll at his feet and said with a smile, "We should leave this ancient maze as soon as possible. If Confucian cultivators find out that the heavenly heart is inside the Misty Mountain maze, I fear that the Immortal Palace will send immortal soldiers and immortal generals to tear this Misty Mountain maze apart from the inside out. All right, fellow immortal, please return to your position." Xiao Hua patted the top of his head. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's figure turned into 3-colored true energy and disappeared inside. Immediately after, Xiao Hua took the soaring dragon shears inside his Daoist robe and stepped on the scroll. His whole body followed the rotation of the scroll and flew forward. At this moment, Xiao Hua was really looking forward to it. The two maze formations gave him endless benefits. He couldn't imagine what kind of treasures he would be able to obtain in Kang Lung's immortal cave. Moreover, he finally understood why Zhai Xingzi and Zhong Daoran were willing to risk their lives to break into this great formation. Because the greater the risk, the greater the reward. This trip to Kang Lung's immortal cave was more rewarding than all of Xiao Hua's adventures. However, Xiao Hua, who had been blinded by happiness, still thought too simply. Of course, in this immortal cave of Senior Dujie, everything was a treasure for the cultivators of the Dao sect, and they were rarely seen. But in fact, how could things that were suitable for cultivation and use be so easy to obtain? For example, the few things that Xiao Hua had obtained. The bone tempering technique of the Dragon Clan, the turtle shell that hid the heavenly heart, the spiritual intelligence that was used to cultivate the scattered nascent soul, the escape technique of the 5 elements, and the pill concoction method. Which of these 4 things could be used by ordinary cultivators? Cultivating the bone tempering technique of the Dragon Clan? Not to mention that human cultivators couldn't cultivate it. Even if they did, they would end up with their bones broken and their flesh torn apart. As for the turtle shell, even G-Man of Meng Mountain couldn't figure out its secrets. How could ordinary Confucian cultivators and Daoist cultivators find anything strange about it? Compared to the turtle shell, the spiritual intelligence was even rarer. If Xiao Hua didn't have the opportunity to obtain Mo Yuntong from Shen Songzi, and if Xiao Hua didn't have the memories of Huang Yi and the others, how could he have obtained them? If that was the case, it was all thanks to Kang Lungzi for collecting so many things, and even more thanks to Xiao Hua, who was both a Confucian cultivator and a Buddhist cultivator, that he was able to turn these useless things into treasures. In fact, when it came to the real Daoist cultivation technique, Kang Lung's understanding of cultivation, Xiao Hua didn't even touch the edge of it. Suppressing his excited little heart, Xiao Hua flew along with the scroll, and his figure slowly disappeared. However, when Xiao Hua flew out from the stone wall and saw everything in front of him, he couldn't help but cry out, Are you kidding me? Why did I return to the original immortal cave? That's right. Once again, what Xiao Hua didn't expect was that although the stone wall he flew out from was not the previous one, the immortal cave he fell into was still the same one. The platform where Xiao Hua took away the jade table was also empty. The jade wave that Xiao Hua took away from the spiritual intelligence was also empty. The entire immortal cave was empty, just like when Xiao Hua left. -13. Chapter 3753. It looks like I've taken the wrong path again. Xiao Hua's gaze swept across the cave and landed on the 4 different entrances. He didn't panic, as if it would be strange if he didn't go the wrong way. However, he thought to himself, if I want to find the real cave, I'm afraid I have to choose another entrance. After thinking for a bit, Xiao Hua took out the Kunlun mirror and sent Fairy Xiongfeng out. Fairy Xiongfeng's face still had a sad expression. She didn't look anywhere else but stared at Xiao Hua as if there was still hatred in her heart. Cough cough. Xiao Hua coughed twice and said with a smile, Fairy Xiongfeng, although this Xiao killed Reverend Xiong Tian, but now I have saved you several times. In terms of gratitude and grudges, you and I are even. Just like what I said in the spirit sense space, you don't have to thank me. I don't expect you to let go of your hatred in such a short time. However, what I want to tell you is that there is a limit to my tolerance. I can tolerate it once, but I can't tolerate it 3 times. If you still can't let it go in the end and want to attack me, then I definitely won't be merciful. If that's the case, why did you save me? Fairy Xiongfeng's expression didn't change as she asked. Ari, it's not easy for a person to live. Even ants struggle to live. Fairy has cultivated for thousands of years. Why do you want to die for some things that you can't cross? Xiao Hua knew that Fairy Xiongfeng's impulse to kill herself had passed and she might not kill herself. He sighed and said, the reason why we cultivators are cultivators is to separate ourselves from love and go against the heavens. Fairy's past was because you were too involved in the love of the world. That's why you're in this situation now. Fairy should think about the essence of cultivation and comprehend what you've gained from the misty mountain maze formation. Fairy Xiongfeng sighed softly. Magic power surged around her body, and her figure and face changed slightly. Soon, she returned to her female form. Fairy Xiongfeng raised her eyes and looked around. Shock flashed in her eyes. After a while, she looked at Xiao Hua and said, "What Daoist Xiao said makes sense. However, my mind is in a mess right now and I might not be able to listen. This time, I gained a lot from Senior Kang Langzi's cave. Not only did I gain some enlightenment, but I also obtained the spirit tool on the jade table. If what you said is true, I might be able to reach the leaving aperture stage if I cultivate in peace. However, it's easier said than done. Since you know how to do it, then do it. It's better than thinking about the past." Xiao Hua could only comfort him. Fairy Xiongfeng sighed and said, "Sigh, if only there was unruffled water in this world, how great would that be?" Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, but when he thought about Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chodi, he knew that the forgotten emotions water might not be useful. But then, Xiao Hua smiled and said, "To be honest, Fairy, this Xiao knows of a place called Heartbreak Mountain. It has the forgotten emotions water that you are thinking of." "Ah? Is that true?" Fairy Xiongfeng's face was filled with disbelief. After Xiao Hua told her the location of Heartbreak Mountain, Fairy Xiongfeng nodded as if there was hope. "Thank you, Daoist Xiao. Once I leave this place, I will immediately go to Heartbreak Mountain." "All right." Xiao Hua smiled faintly, his heart at ease. Since the poor Fairy Xiongfeng had a glimmer of hope, even if this glimmer of hope was shattered, who knows how many years later, even if Fairy Xiongfeng were to think about it again, she might not have the will to die now, right? Since she had a goal, Fairy Xiongfeng looked around and said with a smile, "Daoist Xiao, you are indeed lost. We should have already entered this place before, right?" "Indeed." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "This Xiao knows that I don't have the ability to break the maze, so I let you out and let you decide. Isn't it enough to go to the other 3 passages? There has to be an exit." Fairy Xiongfeng asked with some surprise. "You don't need me to remind you of this, do you?" "Perhaps." Xiao Hua shook his head. "This Xiao is not sure myself, so I asked you, and the other disciples to come out and let them decide for themselves." With that, Xiao Hua let Fujiwen and Xueping out. Everyone saw that they were still in the cave, but the others were gone, and there was an additional nascent soul female cultivator. They were all astonished. Xueping and the rest even felt that they had not left the cave. However, they did not dare to ask too much, and went forward to greet Fairy Xiongfeng. Fairy Xiongfeng waved her hand slightly, not paying much attention to them. When Xiao Hua finished explaining the ins and outs of the matter, everyone understood. Xueping smiled and said, "Since that is the case, Senior can choose another passage. We have no objections." "Hehe, it's different." Xiao Hua smiled slightly, and his eyes swept across the stone wall that he had just flown down. Seeing that there was no movement, he knew that Duanmu Liangsheng had not caught up. He said, "This Xiao's choice is different from everyone's, so I asked Fairy Xiongfeng to bring everyone to find their own opportunities." "Oh, Daoist Xiao, you mean?" Fairy Xiongfeng frowned. "You won't choose the passage with us?" "Yes, that's right." Xiao Hua's gaze turned to the stone wall again, and he smiled bitterly. "This Xiao has some difficulties that I cannot say here. Now that time is of the essence, I think you should choose a passage and bring these disciples in." Others might not be able to sense Xiao Hua's uneasiness, but how could Fairy Xiongfeng not see it? She already knew that after she entered the Kunlun mirror, Xiao Hua would definitely encounter something. She probed, "Daoist Xiao, don't you need my help? Do you still have any strength left?" Xiao Hua asked back. "Sigh, all right." Fairy Xiongfeng was helpless, and similarly looked at the stone wall that Xiao Hua had looked at. She stood up and came to a passage that looked like a water droplet, and said, "This old one will choose this. If any disciple wishes to follow, then come over. However, this old one cannot guarantee your safety like Daoist Xiao." "Why not?" Xue Ping hesitated slightly, and said, "We wait here for other seniors and fellow Taoists who have gone the wrong way. It's best not to." Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. He did not wish to implicate these cultivators because of his grudge with the Duanmu family, and similarly, he did not wish for them to see his fight with the Duanmu family. Yes. Although Xiao Hua's words were tactful, his tone was very certain. Xue Ping and the rest saw that there was no room for doubt, and did not dare to disobey, and walked behind Fairy Xiongfeng. "This old one will leave now." Fairy Xiongfeng nodded towards Xiao Hua, and brought Xue Ping and the rest into the passage. Seeing that everyone had left, Fu Jiwen respectfully asked, "Master, what kind of strong enemy did you encounter? To actually hide like this, and let Fairy Xiongfeng bring fellow Daoist Xue Ping and the rest into the passage? Damn it." Xiao Hua scratched his head, and cursed, "It's our old enemy, Duanmu Qing." Fu Jiwen immediately understood, and an apologetic expression appeared on his face. He bowed and said, "This disciple has made things difficult for Master." "Hehe, there's no need for that." Xiao Hua waved his hand, and said with a smile, "Since you are this old one's disciple, your matter is naturally this old one's matter. Moreover, that person from the Duanmu family might not be this old one's match. This old one just did not want to bother with him." "Oh." Fu Jiwen smiled, "Since Master is not afraid of the people from the Duanmu family, why did you let these disciples leave? If Fairy Xiongfeng was by the side, she would be of help no matter what." Xiao Hua laughed coldly, "Fairy Xiongfeng is Yun Mengzi. During the Jade Pavilion banquet, I killed her lover, Daoist Xiong Tian. Do you think I can be at ease with her by my side?" Sigh. Xiao Hua's words immediately woke Fu Jiwen up. There was no need for Xiao Hua to explain anything else. Fu Jiwen already understood the strangeness of the matter. Thinking of the previous Fairy Shuming, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. There's also Xue Ping. Xiao Hua's gaze didn't leave the stone wall that he just landed on, and at the same time he was secretly on guard. He said, "Master is not afraid of the people from the Duanmu family, but Master can't guarantee that nothing will happen to me. The person who is coming is a mid-tier 5th grade Essence Force Grandmaster. If Master were to slip up and get captured, or if some other accident happens, wouldn't Master be holding him back? It's better not to involve others with this kind of karma." SSS. Fu Jiwen sucked in another breath as if he had a toothache. He had already made it clear that he wouldn't bring Xue Ping and the rest to risk their lives, but when he heard that the person who came was a 5th grade Essence Force, how could he not be surprised? "However, you are Master's disciple. Even if it's a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, you have to follow Master through water and tread on fire," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "This is a disciple's duty," Fu Jiwen replied respectfully. "All right." Xiao Hua clapped his hands and took out the soul extermination vital light. He looked at it proudly and said, "It's a pity that this treasure has been refined for too short a time and has yet to reach the level of a spiritual tool. Otherwise, why would I be afraid of a 5th grade Essence Force Confucian cultivator?" "Then what should I do?" Fu Jiwen asked softly. "You are a Confucian cultivator. This Duanmu Liang Sheng from the Duanmu family seems to be a straightforward person. He doesn't know who you are, so he might not make things difficult for you." Xiao Hua smiled mysteriously. "If something happens to Master, you can still help Master, right?" "Yes, disciple understands." Fu Jiwen blinked his eyes and gave an extremely sinister laugh. He didn't have anything else, but if the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal came out at the crucial moment, the lightning on it would probably make Duanmu Liang Sheng suffer the consequences, right? However, Xiao Hua held the soul extermination vital light and waited for a long time. Not to mention that there was no movement from the stone wall, even the other cultivators did not turn around. Damn it, could it be that that guy also got some dog's hit luck? What kind of opportunity did he encounter? Xiao Hua was a little irritated. Fu Jiwen, who was at the side, was calm and reminded in a low voice, "Master, the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal's lightning punishment seems to be coming again." "Yes, let's wait a little longer." Xiao Hua waved his hand. His eyes probed the interior of the cave. When his eyes once again landed on the brown bear-like cave entrance, his eyes rotated as he asked, "Fu Jiwen, Do you still remember the path that we took earlier? -13. Chapter 3754. Yes, this disciple remembers. Fu Jiwen was indeed smart. He understood Xiao Hua's intentions and replied sinisterly, Master, are you planning to follow his escape route? Hehe, if you want to, hurry up. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and withdrew the soul execution Yuan light. He shouted, when he returns, naturally. No, even if he returns, he won't wait here. He will definitely find another passage. We will definitely be safe if we take the original passage. But the dangers we encountered on the way. Fu Jiwen probed in a low voice, Master, are you still confident? Hehe, Master has many methods. Xiao Hua proudly said, you just have to wait and see. All right, Master, please. Fu Jiwen raised his hand. Although Xiao Hua didn't recognize the way, he had already memorized the dangers of the secret passage. He wasn't afraid of the divine sense space. Not to mention the Jade Blood Core transformation secret technique, his Buddhist awareness and soul awareness were more than enough. Xiao Hua walked to the entrance of the cave and looked at the stone wall one last time. There was still no movement. He wanted to set up some traps here, but he was afraid that Zhai Xingzi and the others would encounter them when they returned. He simply didn't think too much about it and walked into the cave with Fu Jiwen with his head held high. However, he had never expected that when Xiao Hua stepped into the cave, he would be stunned in an instant. He had a dumbstruck expression. Even Fu Jiwen, who accompanied Xiao Hua in, had the same expression. Because in front of them wasn't the secret passage they entered before, but rather a rather large cave. This cave was similar to an ordinary cave. It was about 100 zhong in size. There were stone tables and chairs inside, as well as some strange carvings. What was special was that there was a cloud bed at the head of the cave. On top of the cloud bed was a small jade table. Motherfucker! Xiao Hua slapped his own forehead, and said regretfully as if he had been enlightened, Master should have thought of this long ago. How could Master have chosen the wrong path? I have already passed Senior Kang Langzi's test twice. After this cave is naturally the inner cave. Yes, Master is right. Fu Jiwen secretly laughed in his heart. He understood very well that Xiao Hua couldn't possibly think this way. In fact, no one could possibly think this way. Anyone who reached the outer layer of the abode would choose another path to continue searching for the inner layer of the abode. Xiao Hua only came to the inner layer of the abode by accident because he wanted to avoid his enemies. However, he didn't know how many chances there were to enter the inner layer of the abode. If there was only one chance, Zhai Xingzi, Zhong Daoran, Zunkong Shangren and the others probably wouldn't be able to enter again. Of course, Fu Jiwen also knew that since Kang Langzi had set up such a trap here, it was highly likely that no one else would be able to enter. It seemed that Xiao Hua had also thought of this. Looking at the smile on Fu Jiwen's face, Xiao Hua couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. Ha ha ha, my disciple, take your time to search. In the future, within this cave, even if other people come, they won't be able to obtain anything. Ha ha ha, Master is right. Fu Jiwen also laughed. Senior Kang Langzi's cave abode is really too dangerous. Since I was able to come here with Master, I will definitely get back what we have sacrificed. Rest assured, Master. That's Master's good disciple. Xiao Hua laughed and released his Buddhist sense. However, what puzzled Xiao Hua was that within the abode, his Buddhist sense was actually imprisoned. My disciple, what about your eye-clearing technique and divine sense technique? Xiao Hua turned around and asked. Fu Jiwen honestly replied, Master, I can't use them. Strange. Xiao Hua pinched his chin and was very puzzled. What does Senior Kang Langzi mean? Why does he have to imprison his divine sense in his own cave abode? Master, it should be that Senior Kang Langzi set up the restriction after he left. Fu Jiwen reminded. That's not what I meant. Xiao Hua frowned and said, what I meant was, what does Senior Kang Langzi want to do? In the secret passage and the outer layer of the abode, it was to test our strength. Does he still need to do it here? It shouldn't be necessary, right? Fu Jiwen looked around and said tentatively, unless Senior Kang Lungzi has another cave abode. It doesn't seem like there's another one. Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. There's already a cloud bed here. Oh, where are the two entrances? If I'm not mistaken, there should be a pill room, a herb garden, or a place for refining tools. There shouldn't be another cave abode. At this point, Xiao Hua came back to his senses and patted his head. Look at Master, what am I thinking? Go quickly. You go that way and Master will go this way. See if there's anything in the cave abode and take it all. Yes, disciple understands. Disciple will not leave behind even a single jade eye. Fu Jiwen obediently replied. Go. Xiao Hua waved his hand and released his soul consciousness to explore the entire cave abode. Although Kang Lungzi was a tribulation-passing cultivator with endless means, he still couldn't completely seal off his soul consciousness. This cave abode was only 100 feet in size. Xiao Hua's soul consciousness swept through it and saw everything clearly. After Xiao Hua looked around, he felt a little disappointed. The entire cave abode was divided into 3 parts. The outer layer was near the stone wall. There were some jade shelves, but there were few things on them. Not only were there no ink cloud eyes that Xiao Hua expected, there wasn't even a jade bottle. On the other hand, there were 1 or 2 scattered magic tools on Fu Jiwen's side, but they didn't seem to be of excellent quality. The middle part was filled with jade chairs and other things. There were also some jade tables, which seemed to be used to entertain guests. There were also some jade plates and jade plates on them. However, these jade plates and jade plates were empty. Not to mention spirit fruits, there wasn't even a fruit pit. The remaining part was naturally where the cloud bed was. The cloud bed seemed to be a part of the stone wall. From afar, it looked like a protruding part of the stone wall. There was a jade table on top of it, and on top of it was a small jade ruyi. It seemed to be placed very casually. Seeing this, Xiao Hua suddenly lost interest. He curled his lips and secretly cursed, Senior Kang Lungzi, you're too stingy, aren't you? It wasn't easy for this junior to come here. Why didn't you leave behind any benefits? Could it be that you put all the good things in the cave abode in the maze to test the juniors? Although Xiao Hua complained, he also understood that he had gained a lot through the 2 layers of maze. Zhong Daoran, Zunkong Shangren, Zhai Xingzi, Gusu Qiudi, Gong Shuisin, and even Fairy Xiongfeng and Duanmu Liangsheng must have gained something. Since everyone had gained something, then the treasures in Kang Lungzi's cave abode were actually enough. It didn't matter whether Kang Lungzi put things in the inner layer of the cave abode or not. Hihi, this Xiao understands. Xiao Hua looked around the entire Immortal's cave and had an idea in his heart. He said loudly, Disciple, don't look around here. Quickly go. There are several magic tools on that jade shelf. Take them and go directly to the entrance. Kang Lungzi put all the things in the cave abode in the maze. Yes, this disciple understands. Fu Jiwen hurriedly nodded and rushed to the jade shelves Xiao Hua pointed at. Xiao Hua didn't pay any attention to the things in the cave abode and went straight to the entrance on the cloud bed. There weren't any restrictions on the entrance. It was just a long passage. Xiao Hua's soul sense didn't find anything special. But when his soul sense came to the passage, Xiao Hua's face was full of excitement. Ha ha, as expected. Xiao Hua quickened his pace. Senior Kang Lungzi didn't put anything in the inner layer of the cave abode. But there are good things in his pill room. Or maybe Senior Kang Lungzi didn't think of these things as good things. Xiao Hua didn't wait until he reached the exit of the passage. He impatiently used his soul sense to scan the pill room. When he entered the pill room, he didn't hesitate to walk to the stone wall of the pill room. He saw that the stone wall was filled with irregular grids. Most of them were empty. Only about 30% of the grids were filled with jade bottles. But when Xiao Hua saw the jade bottles, he was slightly stunned. Because there were some words written randomly on the jade bottles. They were of different sizes. What surprised Xiao Hua was that these words were actually very similar to the words of the Dawn Rain continent. Xiao Hua could almost understand what kind of pills were inside at a glance. It wasn't until now that Xiao Hua realized that the words used in Senior Kang Lung's cave abode were the words of the Dawn Rain continent. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua hurriedly took out the ink bottle he got from the cave abode in front of him and checked it again. Sure enough, the words inside were really similar to the words of the Dawn Rain continent's Daoist sect. Xiao Hua was too happy before and didn't notice it. It seems. Xiao Hua put away the ink bottle and thought to himself, the Dawn Rain continent's Daoist sect must have retreated from the hidden immortal continent, no, from the three continent. In other words, the three continents' immortals and Buddhas didn't destroy the Daoist sect. Our Daoist sect just went to another realm. From then on, we were separated from the three continents' Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sects. Similarly, the Dawn Rain continent's Buddhism annihilation isn't completely correct. It's just that the Daoist sect. Ayo, that's not right. If our Daoist sect retreated to the Dawn Rain continent's realm, then how do we explain the Buddhist sect's ruins on the Dawn Rain continent? Could it be that the Buddhist sect and Confucian cultivators chased the Daoist sect to the Dawn Rain continent's realm? Thinking of this, Xiao Hua couldn't help but gasp. His eyes widened and he almost cried out, could it be, that the Dawn Rain continent was originally a part of the three continents? No, it's one of the four great continents. Xiao Hua was completely stunned. His gaze was fixed on the words on the jade bottles. His mind was spinning rapidly again. That's right, if the Buddhist sect and Confucian cultivators didn't cross realms to chase the Daoist sect to the Dawn Rain continent, then there was another possibility. The Dawn Rain continent, the hidden immortal continent, the Western Paradise, and the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm were all in the same realm. However, the Dawn Rain continent where the Daoist sect was entrenched was separated from the three continents where the Confucian, Buddhist, and demon sects were. The place that was separated in the middle was Xiao Hua's Kuehe Sea. It was the three great formations that Xiao Hua encountered at the bottom of Kuehe Sea, the Great Meru Buddhist Formation, the Five Elements Annihilation Formation, and the Clear Time Demon Formation. -13. Chapter 3755. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. After all, his current strength was already comparable to the upper fifth grade of essence energy. Moreover, he was currently in the great formation set up by the tribulation-passing cultivator Kang Lungzi. Although the power of this misty mountain maze formation was extremely great, even if it was 10 times or 100 times stronger, it still couldn't compare to the three great formations Xiao Hua encountered before. That kind of formation was definitely not something that could be done by humans. Moreover, if the Dawn Rain continent and the three continents were not on the same plane, it would be easier for Xiao Hua to return to the Dawn Rain continent. However, if the Dawn Rain continent and the three continents were separated by humans, no matter if it was Dao sect cultivators, Confucian cultivators, or Buddhist disciples, they couldn't find or break these three great formations. Moreover, the three great formations had already been submerged in the dust of time. With Xiao Hua's cultivation, how could he find them again? Therefore, Xiao Hua very naturally chose the former possibility. He even consoled himself with a bitter smile. How could there be a cultivator in this world who could set up such a large formation? Not to mention tribulation passing, even a Mahayana cultivator. Speaking of this, Xiao Hua was dumbfounded again. These words were definitely self-deceiving, because the three continents and the Dawn Rain continent indeed didn't have cultivators who could set up such a large formation. But what about outside the three continents and the Dawn Rain continent? What about outside this so-called cultivation world? Xiao Hua didn't dare to imagine. Heavens! Xiao Hua grabbed his hair and said with a bitter smile, I just want to live on the hidden immortal continent and find my home. That's right. After being distressed, Xiao Hua's eyes suddenly lit up. If the Dawn Rain continent and the three continents are on the same plane, then wouldn't it be more likely that my home is on the hidden immortal continent? That is to say, as long as I find my home, I can also find the way to the Dawn Rain continent. It seems that once this matter is over, I'll hurry back to the Black Cloud Ridge and help the Jiang country's princess establish a country. Then I'll leave the country's affairs to Xiong Yi and Li Xiong. I'll bring some disciples to find Lu Zhen. Now that he had a clue about his home, Xiao Hua's mood was very good. He threw the matter that had nothing to do with him to the back of his mind, and his gaze once again fell on the grid where the jade bottle was placed. There were restrictions on these lattices, but what made Xiao Hua happy was that the lattices were simple restrictions in order to protect the jade bottles and the pills inside. Although these restrictions were unfamiliar to Xiao Hua, they were nothing in Xiao Hua's eyes. Xiao Hua easily broke these restrictions, then he took all the jade bottles and stored them inside the space. Then, Xiao Hua took out the ink cloud pupil and placed it on his forehead. After looking at it for a moment, he waved his hand and took out a jade bottle. The words Vitality Pill were written on top of the jade bottle. However, his handwriting was very sloppy. It could be seen that Kang Langzi wrote it casually. This Vitality Pill is in Senior Kang Langzi's ink cloud pupil. It's a pill used by spirit-severing cultivators to repair their spiritual sense. However, I don't know if the spirit-severing cultivators in Senior Kang Langzi's eyes are the same as the ones in the Dawn Rain continent. Xiao Hua was a bit hesitant, but after a moment, Xiao Hua felt relieved. This Xiao's spiritual sense has been tempered by the rockfall matrix, and now it has far surpassed the nascent soul stage. It has even surpassed the spirit-severing stage in the Dawn Rain continent. Even if this pill is not suitable, this Xiao has a secret technique to guard against it. This Xiao can use the Jade Blood Pill core to repair my spiritual sense, but it consumes a lot of magic power. It's not suitable. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua activated his spiritual sense secret technique and swallowed the Vitality Pill. Boom! This really made Xiao Hua overjoyed. Although this pill had been stored for thousands of years, it did not lose its effect under the restriction. The medicinal power dissolved, and immediately, an indescribable flow rushed into his Niwen palace. This feeling was very similar to the Jade Blood Pill core. Good. Xiao Hua felt his spiritual sense slowly recover, and praised, Senior Kang Langzi's alchemy technique is really marvelous. In a moment, I still have to see if Mo Yuntong was left behind in the cave. After swallowing the Vitality Pill, Xiao Hua put the other jade bottles into his space and carefully stored them away. There were too many gains from the Misty Mountain maze, and he needed time to properly organize them. As for the current green-robed Xiao Hua, not only did he need to refine his spiritual tool, he also needed to comprehend the 5 elements escape technique. Where would he have the extra time? With the gains, Xiao Hua's heart relaxed, and he turned to look at the other places in the alchemy room. Since it was an alchemy room, there was naturally an earth fire and alchemy room. However, in the middle of the alchemy room, the earth fire was completely extinguished, and there was no flame. Not to mention, there was no alchemy furnace above the earth fire. The precious pills and alchemy furnace must be used by Senior Kang Langzi himself, and he must have taken them away. Xiao Hua nodded inwardly. He then looked at the cave entrance that was connected to the pill room. That cave entrance's restriction actually blocked even his soul sense. Clearly, it was very important. Xiao Hua already understood what that place was. Outside this cave entrance is a medicinal garden. Xiao Hua checked again to make sure he didn't miss anything in the alchemy room, and then walked to the entrance of the cave. The restriction that blocked his spiritual sense didn't stop Xiao Hua's figure, and when he stepped into the cave, his heart filled with anticipation was once again satisfied. It wasn't beyond his expectations. The herb garden in Kang Langzi's cave was also inside the array, and the space inside the array seemed to be several hundred li wide. What surprised Xiao Hua the most was that the heaven-earth yuan qi inside this space was especially abundant, far surpassing that of the outside of the cave. Spirit Gathering Array? The name of this array suddenly appeared in Xiao Hua's mind, and then the array also appeared in Xiao Hua's mind, but when Xiao Hua released his spiritual sense and looked at the space, he slightly shook his head. This seems to be similar to a Spirit Gathering Array, but not quite the same. Unfortunately, there isn't any array jade slip here, otherwise this Xiao Hua would be able to comprehend it. Even if there isn't one here, who knows if there isn't one in another place? I don't know if this little guy Fu Jiwen has such an opportunity. Yes, Kang Langzi was a master of arrays, and Xiao Hua didn't believe that he didn't leave some array jade slips in his cave. Unfortunately, although this herb garden is very big, most of the spiritual herbs in the herb garden have already been taken away by senior Kang Langzi, leaving less than 10% behind. Xiao Hua's spiritual sense swept over and saw clearly, and then he bitterly smiled. These spiritual herbs may be rare in the eyes of others, but in this Xiao Hua's eyes, they aren't anything. Ayo, what is this? Just as Xiao Hua was feeling disappointed, his spiritual sense fell on a very distant corner, and his body trembled slightly, and then he hurriedly flew towards that corner of the herb garden. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua seemed to have thought of something, and with a wave of his hand, he released Xiao Guo and Little Silver, and ordered them to help him take away all the spiritual herbs in the herb garden, and then he quickly flew to that corner. When Xiao Hua landed in that corner, he felt a completely different coldness and an indescribable smell of blood. Xiao Hua muttered thoughtfully, so that's how it is. But, inside this restriction, inside the yellow spring water, what is it? Xiao Hua's gaze fell on a deep pit that was several zhong in size, and there was a layer of extremely tough restriction above it. The deep pit was filled with the yellow spring water that Xiao Hua had seen outside the Cloud Mountain Maze Formation, and in the yellow spring water, there was a thumpthick, dark green tree. That small tree was several feet in size, like a coral, and had branches several feet in size. The branches were covered with the same dark green leaves, and the leaves were several inches in size, uneven, and covered with veined patterns. Those patterns were very strange, but in Xiao Hua's eyes, they were somewhat familiar, but he couldn't immediately remember where he had seen them. Looking at the top of each branch of the small tree, there was a jade fruit smaller than the belly of a little finger. The jade fruit was also covered with veined patterns, and it was somewhat similar to the leaves, but there was a faint golden connection between these veined patterns. This must be the most precious thing in the entire medicinal garden. Seeing the appearance of the small tree, Xiao Hua immediately thought to himself, but I don't know why Senior Kang Langzi didn't take it away. Of course, when Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the yellow spring water, he suddenly understood. It wasn't that Kang Langzi didn't want to take it away, but that he couldn't. This thing could only be planted in the yellow spring water, and the yellow spring water could only be found in this cave. Even if Kang Langzi took it away, he couldn't plant it without the yellow spring water. That's not right. Xiao Hua thought to himself, the yellow springs water in the outer layer of the yellow springs array is obviously rootless. I reckon that Senior Kang Langzi must have obtained it from somewhere. Since he was able to move the yellow springs water here, he can naturally move it away. It's not impossible for him to take this small tree with him. Or maybe Senior Kang Langzi just casually planted it back then. Don't you think this thing can survive? Motherfucker, have I gone mad? I don't care whether the Xiaoyu continent and the hidden immortal continent are together or not. I don't care why he left this small tree behind, I just need to put this small tree into my space. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and threw away these indifferent thoughts. He patted his forehead and opened his delirium breaker Dharma eye. Hiss. But when he saw the restriction in front of him and the situation inside the restriction, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. In his delirium breaker Dharma eye, the restriction that was several feet in size was abnormally complex. Strands of brilliance intertwined together, and it was unknown how many times stronger than the restriction in the outer layer of the cave. Moreover, in this rainbow-colored barrier, in the middle of a pool of blood red, the shape of a dark green tree was especially dazzling, like a star. Heavenly pattern land deed. Xiao Hua closed his Dharma eye, and immediately thought of the patterns on the leaves and fruits of the small tree. They were actually extremely similar to the heavenly pattern land deed on the mysterious dark cloud. These leaves are somewhat similar to the twilight moon. Xiao Hua suddenly realized, could it be that this thing has something to do with soul cultivators? Damn it, Senior Kang Langzi, who the hell is he? Why are there so many mysterious things in the cave? -13. Chapter 3756. Fellow Daoist Soul Cultivator, where are you? Where is Little White? Since the item was related to soul cultivators, Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He quickly summoned Xiao Hua and Little White. Soul cultivator Xiao Hua was the first to fly out. If fellow Daoist doesn't know about it, then I don't know about it either. Furthermore, this item is blocked by a seal, so I can't sense if it has anything to do with me. It's fine. Xiao Hua looked at soul cultivator Xiao Hua, who was standing there with soul strands wrapped around his body. Xiao Hua was very happy. He knew that soul cultivator Xiao Hua had comprehended the green seal text in the mysterious dark clouds. He smiled and replied, "You and I are one. I called you out mainly because of Little White. Fellow Daoist, you summoned me at the right time." Soul cultivator Xiao Hua smiled. Little White has been sleeping in the spirit sky for a long time. It has just woken up, but it seems to have something on its mind. Suddenly, a dragon's roar erupted from Xiao Hua's forehead, and a meter-long dragon flew out. As soon as it landed, it transformed into Xiao Hua, who hovered next to Xiao Hua. From the look of it, Xiao Hua was even more majestic than the soul cultivator himself. "Haha, Xiao Hua, I was just about to look for you," Little White said with a smile. It didn't look like the soul cultivator Xiao Hua described it to be. "I remember some things about the past. Oh, and some random things. A few days ago, I was wondering if I should give them to you, but now I've made up my mind. As long as you want them, I'll give them to you." "What are they?" Xiao Hua asked with interest. "Why are they making things so difficult for you?" "Of course they're things I know. Although my memories were sealed by others, they were somewhat loose. Now I've found them. I'm not from Yellow Flower Ridge, but the 10,000 Demon Realm," Little White said with a smile. "Ah, 10,000 Demon Realm?" Xiao Hua exclaimed. "Yes, that's right. If you want them, I can give them to you right now." Little White didn't hide anything. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, thank you. Hehe, why are you being so polite with me?" Little White laughed mischievously, opened its mouth, and spat out a thumb-sized crystal thread, which fell between Xiao Hua's eyebrows. Boom! Xiao Hua's mind felt as if it had been struck by a hammer. His vision almost went black, and then countless things fell into his mind. "Little White, can't you be a little slower?" Xiao Hua almost vomited blood. Just as he was about to complain, he suddenly exclaimed, "What? Your Highness is..." However, before he could finish his sentence, another wave-like thing rushed in and interrupted him. Xiao Hua hastily closed his eyes, calmly absorbing the memories that Little White sent over. After the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua opened his eyes, looked at the complacent Little White, and said with a bitter smile, "There are too many things, too complicated. How the dragon race and the monster race mate. You don't need to let me know, right? I'm letting you know anyway, so there's no need for me to hold anything back." Little White smiled and said, "Besides, it's too troublesome to remove all these things." "All right." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Little White sent over too many things, more than what Huang Yi gave him back then. He didn't know how long it would take to receive them. Now that these things were temporarily placed somewhere, he could only pick up the things he wanted to take a look. "So your Highness is the monster race of the 1,000 Monster Realm, called Xian Yuan, Monster King Mo Sa's beloved concubine." Xiao Hua sighed. "How did you know? Did you peek at your Highness?" "Don't talk nonsense." Mentioning your Highness, Little White's face tightened. "Your Highness seems to be related to the monster that sealed me. That monster's abilities are incomparable. He might be able to hear your word." "All right." Xiao Hua nodded. He didn't tell Little White about Daya's situation, so Little White didn't know that your Highness was abnormal. Little White didn't even know that Xiao Hua had met your Highness. "All right, I've given you everything. I'm also relax." Little White smiled and said, "I'd better go back and rest. I'll just wait for you to cast my body." "Don't worry." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "I called you out because I want you to help me see what this is." Saying that, Xiao Hua used his finger to point at the small tree behind Little White. "What is it?" Little White was also puzzled, because it came out of the mysterious cloud. It didn't sense anything abnormal, but when it saw the small tree inside the seal, its body couldn't help but tremble. even its human form collapsed, and it turned into its dragon form and pounced towards the seal. Rumble. Thunderbolts appeared one after another, forcing Little White to shrink back. That dragon form circled around the seal, as if it was abnormally excited. Seeing Little White like this, Xiao Hua was also shocked. He had never seen Little White like this before. "What is this?" Xiao Hua hurriedly asked. "Is it very precious?" "What is it?" "Damn it. Xiao Hua, how can your luck be so good?" Little White's voice was abnormally excited. "How many fruits are there first?" "It seems." Separated by the seal, Xiao Hua's divine sense couldn't probe, so he frowned and said, 365. "What about the leaves?" "There are 9 leaves on each branch, and at the top of each branch is a fruit. What do you think?" Xiao Hua's heart moved, and he said, "Unfortunately." Little White suddenly sighed again, not answering the question. "What's wrong? What is this thing?" Xiao Hua's curiosity was greatly aroused. Little White withdrew its dragon form and turned back into Xiao Hua's form, pointing its finger and said, "This thing is called the underworld fruit." "Oh, don't ask me why I know. I don't know why I know. Underworld fruit." Xiao Hua originally thought that this rare thing would have an extremely shocking name, but he didn't expect the name to be so ordinary, and couldn't help but frown. Seeing Xiao Hua frown like this, how could Little White not know what Xiao Hua was thinking? It said disdainfully, "Don't look down on this thing just because the name of this underworld fruit is unusual. Can something named after a world be simple? Oh, this underworld fruit is very rare." Xiao Hua still didn't understand. What's the use of this thing? The underworld fruit is naturally not rare in the underworld. It is said that it is everywhere, Little White said with a smile, but outside the underworld, of course it is rare. Xiao Hua was disappointed, shaking his head and said, "Since it is so, what is there to be surprised about? The underworld fruit is everywhere, we have no use for it. If you think so, you are wrong." Little White explained, "Although this thing is everywhere in the underworld fruit, for this underworld fruit to grow for 10 million years, that is also rare." "How do you know this thing has grown for 10 million years?" Xiao Hua looked pensive. The underworld fruit is originally a stem, and it forms after 1,000,000 years. According to the quality, the number of branches is different, or a few, or 100, or 1,000, and the size of the underworld fruit is also different. No matter the size of the tree and the number of branches, after 1,000,000 years, a fruit will grow at the top of each branch, and then every 1,000,000 years, a leaf will grow on each branch, and when each branch grows 10 leaves, the underworld fruit is considered ripe. Sigh, so it is like that. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air, finally understanding the preciousness of this little tree. Also, once the underworld fruit is planted, it cannot be moved. If it is moved, all the branches, leaves and fruits will fall, and the entire underworld fruit will turn into a stem. Damn it, I was wondering. Xiao Hua cursed. No wonder Senior Kang Lungzi left it here. Kang Lungzi? Little White was slightly stunned, looking left and right. Who is this person? Oh, let's talk about this later. Xiao Hua looked at the underworld fruit regretfully and said, "Let's talk about this underworld fruit first." In other words, although this thing has grown for 10 million years, it is still not ripe. Yes, it is definitely not ripe. Little White shrugged, exactly the same as Xiao Hua. What a pity. Xiao Hua was helpless. I saw that the underworld fruit's fruit and leaves had a heaven pattern earth deed, and thought that it would be useful for you and soul cultivators. Looks like we still have to wait 1,000,000 years. I just don't know what a ripe underworld fruit can do. Who said it can't be used? Little White asked curiously. You said it. Xiao Hua was stunned. Didn't you say it was a pity just now? Damn it, I said it was a pity because the underworld fruit is not ripe. Little White laughed. The underworld fruit needs 12 million years to mature. Even in the underworld, it is extremely rare. Especially this kind of underworld fruit that contains the number of stars in the sky, it is extremely good quality. Who knows what effect this underworld fruit will have when it matures? In the future, don't hesitate when you speak, say it all in one breath. Xiao Hua laughed. Little White ignored him, looking at the soul cultivator Xiao Hua at the side and said, "As for the unripe underworld fruit, its fruit and leaves are extremely useful for the soul, As for what use it is, don't ask me, I also don't know. Of course, just by looking at the heaven pattern earth deed on the leaves, it is 100 times stronger than the daybreak moon you used before, not to mention that the leaves have grown for 1,000,000 years, and the fruit has grown for 10 million years. How do I pick the leaves, fruits, and roots? Xiao Hua suddenly asked. Just wrap them with soul strands. Little White hurriedly said, don't use your hands, and also don't use anything else. The underworld fruit is an item of the underworld. It cannot be contaminated with anything with life. Since it is an item of the underworld, how can it be useful for the soul? Xiao Hua was a bit confused. The soul is the most mysterious thing in the world. Little White laughed. Now that I am a soul body, I am the most sensitive to this. At the same time, the soul is also the thing that connects the underworld to the other realms. Of course the underworld fruit is useful for the soul. As for what use it is, I also don't know. Do you need it? Xiao Hua asked. Me? Little White shook his head. I have already merged with the fire dragon's soul. My soul is quite solid. I only need a dragon body to be reborn. I don't need this item. Moreover, this underworld fruit has 365 fruits. Each fruit has 9 leaves. It contains heavenly principles. The soul cultivator Xiao Hua needs to use it. There are endless mysteries. He cannot lack one. If you break the seal and take the underworld fruit, immediately send it into the mysterious dark cloud. I just need to smell it a bit. -13. Chapter 3757. Alas, although this thing is good, how do I collect it? Xiao Hua frowned and looked at the restriction with a troubled expression. Haha, that's not something I need to worry about. Xiao Bai laughed. Now that I've recovered some of my memories, it's already good that I can tell you this. If it was before, I wouldn't even know about this. You can think about how to break the restriction yourself. I'll go back with Soul Cultivator Xiao Hua first. Fellow Soul Cultivator, don't worry. I'll send Xiao Bai back first. Xiao Hua waved his hand. I'll have to borrow your strength later. No problem. Soul Cultivator Xiao Hua didn't say anything, but he knew that if he got the underworld fruit, he would be the most direct beneficiary, so he replied with a smile. Xiao Hua used his soul thread to send Xiao Bai back. Now that his soul thread was strong and tenacious, sending Xiao Bai back was as easy as turning over his hand. Pinching his chin, Xiao Hua looked at the restriction above the yellow springs and frowned. He didn't have much magic power left in his body. Even if he used up all of it, he would only be able to use half of the spiritual fire. But looking at the restriction situation, relying on the spiritual fire alone wouldn't be of any help. He could only attack from different angles. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua opened his delusion breaker eyes and looked at the entire restriction carefully. Finally, he closed his eyes. The light above the restriction seemed to be engraved in his mind. This restriction is very strange. It looks like a single restriction, but it's actually made up of hundreds of small restrictions. These small restrictions complement each other. If you only attack one restriction, the other restrictions will work together to defend. Attacking one restriction is not much different from attacking the entire restriction. But if you attack the entire restriction, the power of the attack will be scattered. Senior Kang Langzi, your restriction is really marvelous. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. You don't want others to break this restriction. Could it be that you want to keep this underworld fruit for yourself? It seems like that's the only way. After the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua opened his eyes and smiled confidently. However, it seems like I'll have to borrow Fu Jiwen's Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal again. Hehe, isn't this the legendary borrowing power to fight strength? Fu Jiwen, this Xiao's disciple, is really useful. Fu Jiwen. Smiling, Xiao Hua raised his head to send a telepathic message to Fu Jiwen. However, after shouting twice, Xiao Hua came back to his senses. There was a restriction in Kang Lang's cave, so his voice transmission might not be heard by Fu Jiwen. Hehe, let's make preparations first. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and hundreds of jade talismans flew into the air. However, just as he was about to make his move, he hesitated. Although this constellation star formation is the most complete innate divine restriction that I have comprehended, it is the best defensive formation. However, when it comes to breaking formations, it's just passable. Green-robed fellow Daoist. Xiao Hua pondered as he summoned green-robed Xiao Hua. He asked, "What do you think? In terms of defense, if our constellation star formation claims to be second, no other formation would dare to claim to be first." The green-robed Xiao Hua controlled his formless nascent soul to appear. He shook his head and explained, "But if it's used for breaking restrictions and attacking, it's far inferior to the Pleiades devil-devouring immortal formation and the golden crow immortal slaying demon formation. But we haven't comprehended enough of the other divine restrictions." Xiao Hua said regretfully, "They say that when it's time to use a book, one will regret not having enough. Only now do I understand that opportunities are only given to those who are prepared. You and I still haven't accumulated enough. Yes, what we lack now is time. Fellow Daoist, it's time to go into seclusion. Only seclusion is the key to our progress." Green-robed Xiao Hua said with deep emotion. "Of course I can go into seclusion, however, I's primordial spirit is very strong. With fellow Taoists comprehending their own techniques, what's the difference between this and I going into seclusion?" Xiao Hua said with a smile, "Of course, after these trivial matters are over, I still have to properly organize what I've gained and comprehended." At this point, Xiao Hua smiled, "Green-robed fellow Daoist, since you've already comprehended the Pleiades devil-devouring immortal formation and the golden crow immortal slaying demon formation, why don't you use them now?" "All right." Green-robed Xiao Hua nodded. After the last encounter in the Eye of the Sea, this poor Daoist's golden crow immortal slaying demon formation has comprehended more than 200 talismans, so this poor Daoist can barely arrange a powerful formation. "Leave this to I." "Good." Xiao Hua nodded, then took out the Kunlun mirror and instructed, "Fellow Daoist, set up the formation first. I will also make some preparations. When everything is ready, I will go and call Fu Jiwen. Fellow Daoist, please control this Kunlun mirror well. We will work together to break this restriction." "I'll listen to fellow Daoist's instructions." Green-robed Xiao Hua opened his mouth and swallowed the Kunlun mirror. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of flashing red jade talismans fell into the air. As green-robed Xiao Hua formed hand seals, clusters of flames appeared and disappeared into the void. After half an hour, green-robed Xiao Hua finished setting up the golden crow immortal slaying demon formation. Xiao Hua also thought of the details of breaking the formation. Then, Xiao Hua nodded towards green-robed Xiao Hua and walked out of the medicinal garden. Xiao Hua passed through the alchemy room and arrived at Kang Langzi's inner mansion. When he saw the situation in front of him, the joy on his face disappeared and was replaced by a layer of frost. Because on the side of the bed, there was a scholarly cultivator in bright yellow clothes carefully examining the Chenkuan bag in his hand. At the feet of this scholarly cultivator, Fu Jiwen was curled up on the ground with a painful expression on his face. Obviously, the scholarly cultivator was interrogating him. "Who is it?" When Xiao Hua walked out of the pill room, the scholarly cultivator immediately noticed. He raised his head and looked at Xiao Hua with a gaze like lightning. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and stared at the scholarly cultivator coldly. "Who are you?" "Ha ha." The scholarly cultivator was not afraid of Xiao Hua. He looked at the Chenkuan bag in his hand and put it away. He kicked Fu Jiwen and laughed. "I am naturally me. You should be the cultivator who came in with the little scholar. Oh, why do you look like a Daoist? Your luck is pretty good. You can actually touch Kang Lung's inner palace. Quickly take out your Chenkuan bag and I will spare your lives. Who are you?" Xiao Hua did not answer and only coldly looked at the scholarly cultivator. The scholarly cultivator was stunned. He looked at his feet in disbelief and then looked at Xiao Hua. He blinked his eyes and said in surprise, "I didn't tell you my name because I didn't want to take your lives. Could it be that there are people in this world who don't want to take their lives? Who are you?" Xiao Hua released his soul sense but could not determine the cultivation level of this scholarly cultivator. Therefore, he did not dare to act blindly without thinking. He only wanted to provoke this scholarly cultivator and make him attack. Only then could he protect Fu Jiwen from harm. But at this time, although Fu Jiwen's expression was extremely distorted and he was enduring a strange kind of pain, his eyes blinked from time to time as if he wanted to say something to Xiao Hua. "My name is Huang Shou," the scholarly cultivator said with a fiendish smile. "Since you know my name, don't think of leaving this cave alive." "Your Excellency, don't you want to know who I am?" Xiao Hua smiled and took 2 steps forward. The scholarly cultivator named Huang Shou shrugged. He waved his hand and took out a folding fan. This folding fan was only 1 foot long and was golden in color. When Huang Shou opened the folding fan, a picture of birds chirping in an empty valley was revealed. At this time, Huang Shou had a lazy expression on his face. He kicked Fu Jiwen to the side and said with a smile, "2 people who are about to die, so what if I know your name?" "My name is Xiao Hua." Seeing this, Xiao Hua's heart settled. He took 2 steps forward and said with a smile, "Fellow immortal Huang, when you reach the underworld, don't forget." "Oh, right, I also have a Dharma name. Daoist Xiao." Saying this, Xiao Hua waved his hand. The soaring dragon shears flashed with a golden light and slashed towards Huang Shou's neck. Xiao Hua hated this Huang Shou very much. "Ah! Nascent soul." When Huang Shou saw the golden light and heard Xiao Hua say his Dharma name, his expression immediately changed. He waved the folding fan in his right hand and instead of advancing, he retreated and threw himself at Fu Jiwen. "Die." Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with a cold light. He flew up and grabbed with his right hand. A powerful imprisoning force fell towards Huang Shou. Seeing Xiao Hua fly a few feet away, Huang Shou's originally shocked face suddenly revealed a smile. His flying figure also suddenly stopped. Yellow clouds appeared around his body. On the folding fan in his right hand, the straight mountain peak actually flew out from the folding fan. Tens of thousands of armor inscriptions surged and blocked in front of the soaring dragon shears. At the same time, Huang Shou flicked his left hand. A fist-sized imperial equipment rushed into the air. In an instant, there were tens of thousands of multicolored lights. Clang! A crisp sound rang out. The soaring dragon shears streaked across the mountain peak like lightning and split it in half. The folding fan in Huang Shou's hand also broke at the same time. A trace of surprise suddenly appeared on Huang Shou's smiling face. His entire body quickly retreated and dodged the soaring dragon shears. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. Xiao Hua's body stagnated. His soul consciousness suddenly swept back. His face was also filled with astonishment. Who? But the place where Xiao Hua's soul consciousness swept through, that is, the space on both sides of the cave entrance of the alchemy room distorted inch by inch. Waves of righteous qi and inscriptions flowed out. 2 Huang Shou wearing bright yellow clothes appeared. Moreover, these 2 people also held fist-sized imperial equipment in their hands. The multicolored lights of these imperial equipment were exactly the same as Huang Shou's imperial equipment. At this moment, although Xiao Hua didn't know whether these 2 people were Huang Shou's primordial spirit or something else, how could he not understand that he had already fallen into Huang Shou's trap? At the same time that he schemed for Huang Shou to leave Fu Jiwen, Huang Shou also schemed for him to step out of the alchemy room. "Xiao Hua, hand over your life." As soon as the 2 Huang Shou behind Xiao Hua appeared, they shouted in unison. At the same time, they urged the imperial equipment in their hands. Strings of inscriptions flowed like lightning in the multicolored light. In the blink of an eye, they merged together. The multicolored light shrouded an area of several dozen feet to the left of Xiao Hua. The inscriptions on the imperial equipment drove thousands of righteous qi ribbons and wrapped around Xiao Hua in an extremely mysterious trajectory. -13. Chapter 3758. Roar. Sensing the terrifying imprisoning power within these inscriptions, Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed. These inscriptions were clearly designed to deal with Dao sect cultivators. The true essence within his meridians was imprisoned, and he couldn't activate it at all. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly displayed his transcendent's golden body, and his figure rapidly expanded, wanting to break through the binding of these inscriptions. Rumble. Xiao Hua's transcendent's golden body had just appeared when the three imperial treasures let out a rumbling sound. The entire space enveloped by multicolored light trembled. Following the trembling, the multicolored light suddenly converged, and the imperial treasures fell at a speed invisible to the naked eye. Xiao Hua was caught off guard. Although his transcendent's golden body flashed with a dark golden brilliance, wanting to dodge the imperial treasures still fell on Xiao Hua's transcendent's golden body in the end. The three imperial treasures turned into a complete one at this time, forcefully locking Xiao Hua's neck like a shackle. As this shackle fell, immediately thousands of inscriptions mixed with a vast aura were born from the void. It was like a heavenly punishment prison crystal inscription chain, locking Xiao Hua's entire body. Oh! The transcendent's golden body let out a rare groan, like the snoring of a sleeping demon god. Xiao Hua seemed to be angry, and his transcendent's golden body madly expanded. However, Zilla. The chains made a jerky sound, and the vast aura within the inscriptions tightly bound Xiao Hua's transcendent's golden body. With Xiao Hua's strength, he actually couldn't break free. On the contrary, because it expanded, the inscription chain spun even more crazily, suppressing Xiao Hua's heavenly infusion technique and heavenly laws embodiment technique. Under this powerful force, the huge transcendent's golden body shrank in circles. Xiao Hua was truly extremely shocked. The strength of the three Huang Shous was only at the upper fourth level of essence energy, which was also the realm of great Confucian. They had yet to reach the level of great Grandmaster who could refine the spirit back to the void. However, this imperial equipment was truly strange. It seemed to have been specially refined to restrain Daoist cultivators. Even Xiao Hua, who could kill Daoist cultivators at the fifth level of essence energy, was firmly locked in place. Ha ha ha! As expected of someone on the yellow board. Under the joint attack of us three brothers, you still have the strength to struggle. Huang Shou saw Xiao Hua fall into the trap and laughed towards the sky. Big brother. The Confucian cultivator behind Xiao Hua landed on the left, with a pleasant surprise on his face. Yellow token to suppress this bastard. This fellow's strength was simply too terrifying. I've never seen a Daoist cultivator who could still struggle after being locked down by the yellow earth lock. Don't worry, third brother. The other Huang Shou chuckled and said, Big brother took the little scholar cultivator's Chenkuan bag. There were many rare treasures in it. It seems that he obtained them from Kang Lung's inner palace. This Xiao Hua's Chenkuan bag naturally has many more things. Let's take the Chenkuan bag first. Okay, I'll go now. The so-called third brother agreed and was about to descend. At this time, Xiao Hua was already standing on the ground. Using both arms to support himself, the yellow earth lock once again let out a Kaila sound. However, that was all it took to scare the three Huang Shou so much that their expressions changed. The third brother even took half a step back. The Xian Huang token? Who are you? Could it be related to the mysterious yellow list? Xiao Hua didn't withdraw his transcendent's golden body. After hearing this, his face turned cold and he asked coldly. What Xian Huang list? I don't know. Huang Shou simply didn't answer Xiao Hua's question. He scolded, third brother, quickly take his Chenkuan bag. Don't talk nonsense with him. With that, Huang Shou took out a 3-inch seal from his bosom. The top of the seal was 1 inch long and the bottom was 2 inches long yellow. A golden light flashed from the bottom of the seal. This was the Xian Huang token Huang Shou was talking about. Yes, big brother. The triplet brother, who looked exactly like Huang Shou, agreed and walked to the front of Xiao Hua's golden body. However, before he could raise his hand, the Tungjiao scissors, which had just fallen to the ground, suddenly flew up and slashed his neck faster than lightning. Although countless inscriptions surged out from the bright yellow clothes to resist, these inscriptions were instantly cut in half along with his neck. How is this possible? The triplet brother opened his mouth, and a shadow of his primordial spirit flew out from his neck. He shouted, how can a cultivator locked by the yellow ground lock still have spiritual power? Swish. The golden light of the Ting Jiao shears was truly overbearing. The primordial spirit only swayed, but the tail of the Ting Jiao shears swung, and the primordial spirit was also cut into two halves. It was even neater than a piece of white paper cut with scissors. Boom! As the Ting Jiao shears showed off its power, a colorful beam of light suddenly appeared from the left side of the elixir room of the cave residence and hit the other triplet brother of Huang Shou with lightning speed. The Confucian cultivator screamed, and the inscriptions and noble spirit surging around him were swallowed up by the beam of light. Even the shadow of his primordial spirit was killed by the beam of light before it could escape. Who? Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Before Huang Shou's Shenhuang token could be used, his two triplet brothers were killed. Huang Shou couldn't help but look at the source of the beam of light in horror. Unfortunately, the clear eye technique and the divine sense technique were useless. He couldn't see anything at all. However, even if he didn't know that it was Xiao Hua's invisible nascent soul, he also knew that the person who came must be related to Xiao Hua. He decisively opened his mouth, and a stream of true qi gushed out and fell on the Shenhuang token. Boom! The Shenhuang token suddenly expanded, and emitted a brilliance like the sun. Rumble! Under this sun, two fist-sized green seal characters rushed out from between Xiao Hua's eyebrows, and then the heaven and earth chanted. Layers of faint green lightning appeared above Huang Shou's head, and hit him head-on. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Like falling snow melting into water, in the sun-like brilliance of the mysterious yellow token, clusters of inscriptions turned invisible, and streams of awe-inspiring qi were struck into nothingness. Huang Shou was like a bald chicken with plucked feathers, trembling as he stood in front of Xiao Hua. Xiao! Xiao Hua! Huang Shou couldn't help but beg for mercy, but just as he cried out, the murderous golden light appeared again with a whoosh, and Huang Shou's body was split in half from top to bottom. The nascent soul that had already refined qi and returned to spirit was immediately killed by the lightning as soon as it appeared. Fellow Daoist, you were a bit careless. Green-robed Xiao Hua put away the Kunlun mirror and looked at Xiao Hua, who had already put away his Dharma body and was looking down at the so-called yellow earth lock. Alas! Xiao Hua sighed and shook his head slightly. Yes. This Xiao only thought that only I had the luck to enter Senior Kang Lang's cave, but I didn't expect that others would also occasionally step on dog shit. However, if these three Confucian cultivators who are only at the 4th level of origin energy want to sneak attack this Xiao, they are still too weak. Ha ha! Green-robed Xiao Hua knew that although his appearance had changed the situation of the battle and killed the three Confucian cultivators, he also knew that even without him, Xiao Hua's soul technique would have been able to succeed, so he simply smiled and asked, "Do you still need this poor Daoist's help?" "No need. Fellow Daoist, go set up the formation to break the restriction. These three Confucian cultivators should be following behind us. Since they are here and Zhai Xingzi and the others haven't yet, Zhai Xingzi and the others won't come." Xiao Hua shook his head. "Wait until I see the memories of these three people, then I will know the cause of this matter." "Okay." Green-robed Xiao Hua agreed and didn't say anything else. Xiao Hua's soul thread reached out from between his eyebrows and landed between Huang Shou's eyebrows. After a moment, he looked at Huang Shou's two triplets and unconsciously frowned. Strange. These three people's memories, why do they have traces of being erased? Apart from knowing that these three people are called Huang Shou, Huang Zhen, and Huang Ji, this Xiao can't see their origins at all. However, I heard Huang Shou mention the mysterious yellow proclamation just now. Moreover, the imperial tool is called the yellow earthlock and the imperial tool similar to the seal is called the mysterious yellow token. These three people must be related to the mysterious yellow proclamation. Just as he thought of this, the Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Fellow Daoist, think about it more. Star-Lord Palace's Gusu Churan is called Gusu Chodi. Huang Shou, Huang Zhen, and Huang Ji have the surname Huang and the given name Shouzhen Ji. Isn't this the surname Tian Di Shen Huang in the 1000-character classic? Isn't this the surname Tian Di Shen Huang in the 1000-character classic? Yes, fellow Daoist, you're right. I understand." Xiao Hua sighed. Previously, this Xiao thought that the mysterious yellow proclamation was just a bounty list. I didn't expect that there would be a mysterious yellow token after the mysterious yellow proclamation. It seems that this Xiao has caused trouble. Fellow Daoist, you don't cause trouble, but trouble always provokes you. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua said again, we Confucian cultivators emphasize cooperation and cooperation. Fellow Daoist, you have to think about it more. If you want to run amok on the hidden immortal continent by yourself, I'm afraid it will be difficult. Yes, I understand. You can open this yellow earth lock, Xiao Hua said with a frown. Puff. Above Xiao Hua's head, a three-colored cloud spurted out and turned into three big hands that fell on the yellow earth lock that imprisoned Xiao Hua. The three big hands turned into inscriptions that fell on the yellow earth lock according to the memories of Huang Shou and the other triplets. These inscriptions flickered and changed from time to time. After a while, there was a crisp catcher sound, and the yellow earth lock split into three and fell in the air. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the yellow earth lock and the mysterious yellow token both fell into his hand. He carefully looked at them and said in a low voice, since there is a yellow earth lock, there should also be a mysterious heaven lock. The yellow earth lock is used to lock Dao cultivators on the yellow proclamation, and the mysterious heaven lock has always been used to lock Dao cultivators on the mysterious proclamation. It seems that there are many immortal palaces on the hidden immortal continent. There is not only one Star Lord Hall. After speaking, Xiao Hua opened his mouth, and the yellow earth lock and the mysterious yellow token both fell into the hands of Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua also opened his mouth and spat out four-colored true qi to take the two imperial treasures into his body. After Xiao Hua removed the restriction on Fu Juwen's body, Fu Juwen stood up and said very embarrassedly, disciple was careless. Thank you, master. Xiao Hua nodded and asked, what's the matter with these three people? -13. Chapter 3759. Okay, father understand. Fu Juwen hurriedly said, Senior Kang Lung's orthodoxy and the Tao of Array are in the cave that disciple went to. Disciple put everything in the Qiankuan bag. When disciple saw that there was nothing left behind and came out, I saw the three cultivators enter the inner cave. The cultivator called Huang Shou captured disciple without saying anything and wanted to interrogate me about master's whereabouts. However, disciple did not give in, so the two cultivators ambushed me in the air while Huang Shou waited here for master to come out. What else did the three of them talk about? Xiao Hua asked, can you tell the origin of these three people? I can't. Fu Juwen shook his head without hesitation. Other than interrogating disciple, these three people were communicating with each other, as if they were hiding something. If not for master's interrogations, disciple wouldn't even know that this cultivator was called Huang Shou. Xiao Hua nodded. With a wave of his hand, he burned the three corpses with true samadhi fire and took away all the Qiankuan bags. However, after thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua took out another Qiankuan bag and handed it to Fu Juwen. This should be Senior Kang Lung's array. You can keep it. This is your own fate. Hehe, master, disciple's Tao of Array still needs master to teach me. Isn't disciple's opportunity given by master? Fu Juwen hurriedly said with a smile, besides, isn't disciple's thing also master's? Master should first comprehend it and then pass it on to disciple. That's fine too. Xiao Hua was not polite and took everything and said, it's not safe to leave it with you. If master keeps it, no one will be able to find it. Fu Juwen looked at the pill room again and said with a smile, seems like master is also returning from a rewarding journey. Not at all. Xiao Hua said with a bitter smile, in the pill room, there is nothing but a few jade bottles. Instead, there are some good things in the herb garden. Let's go, master still needs to borrow your heaven punishment prison crystal to break the seal. Yes, master. Fu Juwen nodded and said with a smile, but, master, when will you help disciple with this heaven punishment prison crystal? Isn't this an opportunity? Let's go. Xiao Hua patted Fu Juwen's head and said with a smile. Yes, master. Fu Juwen was overjoyed. When Xiao Hua brought Fu Juwen into the pill room, He still looked at the entrance of the cave and stared at it for a moment. Since Huang Shou and the other two were able to enter this place, then Xiao Hua and Fu Jiwen were definitely not the only lucky ones. His previous thoughts were too arbitrary. Perhaps Duanmu Liangxing, Zhai Xingzi and the others would also come here. Zhai Xingzi and the others were still fine, but if Duanmu Liangxing were to come, things would be very bad. Therefore, when Xiao Hua sent Fu Jiwen to check the restrictions on the underworld fruit, he also carefully set up the capital star formation in front of the entrance of the medicinal garden. Fortunately, although Kang Longzi had already set up a formation in the space of the medicinal garden, Xiao Hua's jade talisman was also set up without expending much magic power. It's better to be safe than sorry. Xiao Hua finished setting up the formation, and only then did he relax. He thought to himself, I'll remember these words. In the future, he couldn't let his guard down. Anything that could happen would happen. Moreover, it can happen at any time when you are not paying attention. Also, if the origins of Huang Shou and the other two are related to the profound yellow order, then I'll have to be even more careful in the future. The strength I've displayed now is at the upper fourth level of essence energy. Whether it's the Duanmu family or the profound yellow order, the cultivators they sent out are all around the lower fifth level of essence energy. Although Huang Shou and the other two were at the upper fourth level of essence energy, the three of them, together with the yellow earthlock, were able to firmly suppress the late-stage nascent soul cultivators of the Dao sect. Now that I've killed the three of them, I'm afraid that the cultivators who come in the future will all be at the upper fifth level of essence energy. Our days are getting worse and worse. Chirp chirp. Xiao Hua's mind was full of worries. Just as he returned to the medicinal garden, Little Silver and Xiao Guo immediately flew over. Xiao Guo's face was red and cute. With a wave of her hand, a large amount of spirit herbs and spirit fruits landed in Xiao Hua's hands. Not bad, not bad. Xiao Hua put away the things and patted Xiao Guo's head. He smiled and praised, "You two are really capable. Hurry up and go. Keep up the good work and bring everything back home." Chirp chirp. Little Silver chirped cheerfully and swiftly rushed to a medicinal field protected by a restriction. He bit down with his sharp teeth, and it wasn't long before the restriction was broken. Then, Xiao Guo landed in the medicinal field. With a wave of her hands, a dark green halo fell on the spirit herbs, and the intact spirit herbs slowly flew out of the ground. Seeing that the two little ones were busy beyond words, Xiao Hua flew over to the yellow springs. At that moment, Fu Jiwen had already been looking at it for a long time. When he saw Xiao Hua come over, he hurriedly said in a low voice, "Shifu, this restriction should be called a boundary. It's extremely powerful. I'm afraid this disciple can't help Shifu. Isn't it good that the boundary is powerful?" Xiao Hua smiled. "How much longer do you need to use the heavenly punishment prison crystal?" "For more hours." Fu Jiwen thought for a moment, then said, "But Shifu, in my opinion, even if we use the heavenly punishment prison crystal, I'm afraid we won't be able to break this boundary. After all, the boundary is too big, and it's different from the restriction on the jade case from before. It doesn't seem to be actively attacking." Millimeter, Shifu already knew this, Xiao Hua said indifferently. "Go take a look elsewhere first. Not only are there a lot of spirit herbs in this medicinal field, the spirit gathering arrays on each field are different as well, which will be extremely useful for you to comprehend arrays. Also, memorize them well and tell Shifu about them in detail later." "Yes, Shifu." Fu Jiwen's eyes lit up, and he agreed to fly elsewhere. On the path of formations, Fu Jiwen and Xiao Hua were in a different situation. Fu Jiwen had seen plenty of formation diagrams, spirit formations, and essence formations, but he had never received any real guidance. He had only seen a few real formations. Xiao Hua, on the other hand, had a very high starting point. He had started with innate divine restrictions, such as the capital stars array, but he was very lacking in the flexible use of ordinary magic arrays. What the two of them lacked was something Kang Longzi could teach them. Just as Xiao Hua said, there was a huge spirit gathering array on this medicinal field, and each field had a different spirit gathering array according to the different spirit herbs and their habits. The spirit gathering arrays were similar in nature, but the details were very different. This was the use of arrays. When Xiao Hua entered the Misty Mountain bewildering array, he was also very emotional. He could see through the nature of these bewildering arrays at a glance, but he didn't know how to set them up. There were many spirit-gathering arrays in the entire medicinal field. Not only were they useful to Fu Jiwen, but even Xiao Hua himself would benefit a lot from comprehending them. After sending Fu Jiwen away, Xiao Hua flew around the restriction for a long time. He discussed with the green-robed Xiao Hua several times, and finally finalized all the details. Seeing that it was almost time, Xiao Hua stood in the air. Fu Jiwen had already flown over and took out the heavenly punishment prison crystal, waiting for Xiao Hua's order. Shifu. Seeing Xiao Hua standing there with his eyes closed, Fu Jiwen reminded, "It's almost time." "Okay, put the heavenly punishment prison crystal on the restriction." Xiao Hua opened his eyes and said calmly as the magic power in his body accumulated. "Yes, Master." Fu Jiwen looked at some of the heaven's punishment prison crystals that were already surging with rosy clouds. He gently loosened his hand and the heaven's punishment prison crystals fell towards the barrier below him. Before the heaven's punishment prison crystals touched the barrier, layers of heaven's punishment thunder had already formed. Crackle. Thunderbolts were born from the void and fell inside the heavenly punishment prison crystal. At the same time, the thunderbolts also affected the barrier. Unfortunately, to Xiao Hua and Fu Jiwen's disappointment, when the thunderbolts fell on the barrier slightly fluctuated with magic power. This fluctuation was like a surging whirlpool, scattering the power of the thunderbolts around the barrier. It didn't produce any counterattack power. Therefore, the heavenly punishment thunder didn't have any intention of attacking the barrier and only wreaked havoc around the heavenly punishment prison crystal. Shifu. Seeing that the heavenly punishment prison crystal didn't work, Fu Jiwen was somewhat embarrassed and said in a low voice. However, Xiao Hua seemed to be standing there normally, but all his attention was focused on the point where the heavenly punishment prison crystal's thunderbolts came into contact with the barrier. He was carefully observing the movement of the barrier's magic power and the extension of the force. After the heavenly punishment prison crystal's thunderbolts passed, Xiao Hua opened his mouth and said faintly, "Disciple, you're right. This barrier adheres to defense and doesn't attack. It's completely different from the previous restriction. As the saying goes, one can be strong without desires. This barrier is a rare authentic defensive formation. It doesn't attack at all and only focuses on defense. It's like a defensive cultivator. Because of this, I'm afraid that this barrier can't be completely broken without the strength to pass the tribulation." Fu Jiwen put away the heavenly punishment prison crystal and said with a bitter smile, "If that's the case, it seems that only the immortal emperors of the immortal palaces and the patriarchs of the aristocratic families have this cultivation level. Shifu probably can't break the restriction now." Shifu said that to completely break this barrier, one must have the strength to pass the tribulation. Xiao Hua laughed mischievously. "But why must Shifu completely break this barrier? If Shifu wants the things inside, Shifu only needs to open a small gap." Disciple understands. Fu Jiwen finally understood why Xiao Hua kept staring at the barrier just now. "How can Shifu help? I'm afraid that with your cultivation level, you won't be able to." Xiao Hua thought for a moment. "Shifu is afraid of hurting you if you stay here. You'd better collect everything in this medicinal garden with Xiao Guo and Little Silver." "Yes, Shifu." Hearing this, Fu Jiwen very tactfully flew over. Afterwards, Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent and clapped his hands. Buzz. 3-colored true qi gushed out and 9 flying swords flew out from the true qi, letting out ear-piercing sword cries. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua's voice came from the flying swords. "Fellow immortal, this little one receives the flying swords and gives fellow immortal a helping hand. I'll have to trouble fellow immortal." Xiao Hua cupped his hands. "This barrier, I'm afraid it won't be easy for me to break through it with my Daoist methods. I'll have to rely on fellow immortal's Confucian cultivator voice." "Good." The sword chi of the 9 flying swords surged and formed a human figure similar to Xiao Hua's size. This little one has already prepared according to fellow immortal green-robed's words. 13. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.